Thank you. 6:01, call to order the special meeting of the Hastings School Board on April 24th, 2023. Could we please have attendance taken? Director Clerk Beisel.
Director Zuzik.
Present.
Director Dressley.
Present.
Director Tate.
Here.
Director Beisel here. Director Malm.
Here.
Chair Hadeen.
Here.
And Director Davis is on his way.
Thank you. We'll make note of the time at which Director Davis is able to join us. At this time, please stand if you are able, face the flag, and remove any head. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All right, we have a motion by Director Beisel, second by Director Malm to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimous. Tonight, our items for discussion are all related to the selection of our next superintendent, and we are joined by Ms. Barb Dorn from MSBA to help facilitate our meeting tonight. Ms. Dorn.
Thank you, Chair Hadeen. Good to see everyone again. Thanks so much for having us here. We're looking forward to the next couple of hours talking about the search coming up here in Hastings. There is a lot to cover. The three big areas will really be reviewing the stakeholder survey report and answering your questions in that regards. We also will be conducting our interview training, which you have the information in front of you as well, in anticipation of your interviews coming up, both round 1 and round 2. And then the third part will be coming up with the interview schedule and also the interview questions for round 1. We aren't quite ready to talk about round 2 yet. So those are the three big areas I'm hoping to cover this evening, again, as well as answering any and all questions you might have as we go along. So please consider this to be a relatively informal presentation of the report and of the training materials. Interrupt me, ask questions as they pop into your mind, just to make sure we can establish the foundation you want to make a very informed decision when the time comes to select your next leader. So with that, I'd like to start with the stakeholder summary report. Becky will be screen sharing this as well. So if we could start with the Hastings Public Schools Superintendent Search Stakeholder Engagement Superintendent Search Survey. We are going to go through this. I'm going to highlight some things for you, answer your questions, and then we'll discuss what's next in terms of the report when we're all done. So the first thing I want to do is congratulate Hastings on the high engagement of your stakeholders in this survey. It was really exciting to see that number climb. On average, a district of your size, we would have expected to see about 475 responses. That would be the average for the number of students you have in your district. And you had, as you can see, 701. So you are far above average, which I know you know, but it's wonderful to see that level of engagement and interest in the search process. The majority of the folks that filled out the survey were in English, but you did have Spanish speakers taking the survey as well, which is also wonderful. I think another sign of the engagement of your stakeholders in this is that Q&A session that we did. We held the Q&A with MSBA regarding the superintendent search. The link is on the district website, and you have so far had nearly 100 people watch that. So that's a lot of views also for a district your size. And remember that that link is available through the entirety of the search. So as you, as board members, receive questions from stakeholders about what's going to happen, when is it going to happen, why is it happening that way, the first thing I do is just refer them to the district website to watch that Q&A. And then after that, if they have additional questions, they can certainly reach out to me at any time. In terms of results, we did ask for some self-identifiers so people could tell us what lens they were using when they completed this survey. You had a lot of parents. 60% of the people who responded to the survey were parents, followed by staff members. Just over 21% of the respondents were staff members. You did have respondents in all the categories, though, which is also great, including students. There are many times that we do this survey and we see 0% from students, but you had about 2.5% of the respondents were students of Hastings Public Schools. So I want to give you congratulations on that in terms of the student interest in the survey. Areas of expertise. This was one of the simple pick your top 6 questions for your stakeholders. And you can see them here as listed: budget and finance, collaborative leadership, curriculum development and evaluation, diversity, equity and inclusion, school reform, and personnel management. And those are all really big categories. And we're going to, as we move through the report, compare and contrast stakeholder input to the school board's input when we first started the search and got your leadership profile up and running. I would say the collaborative leadership and the diversity, equity, inclusion definitely align with the board. The stakeholders did see budget and finance as a priority, so we're going to talk about that, and the curriculum development and evaluation in terms of, I think, interview questions. We'll want to include some things in those areas in addition to your hiring criteria. The specialized skills, I really like seeing this alignment. When you look at those lists of the top 6 areas that they think someone should have skills in, the top 2 are exactly what the board has. They're flipped, but the top 2 for your stakeholders are the same top 2 for the school board. So acting with honesty and in an ethical manner and being visible and accessible. We're at the top for you as well as your stakeholders. And that is a really good sign. When the top ones align, and I think there were perhaps like 26 choices, to have those same top 2 is terrific. So I'm glad to see that. It does mean that you are in tune with what your district stakeholders are looking for as well. The other 4 are similar in nature to what you have identified in your hiring criteria. I see words like collaborative in your work as well as the stakeholders here. The leadership team and building a strong leadership team is in both of them. Having communication skills, human relations skills, those are in both. And also accommodating different perspectives. It's worded slightly differently because we did some wordsmithing with your priorities. I do see the similarities here, which is really great. So that was encouraging for us as well. In terms of the previous experience on the next page, you had 43% of the folks said yes, they should have previous experience as a superintendent, while 56% said no. That also fits beautifully with the school board's decision to put previous experience as a superintendent is preferred but not required. So also aligned there. And then you can see some personal characteristics. We asked your stakeholders to identify the top 6, and you can see those as well. Honest and ethical, a great communicator, a problem solver, being transparent, consistent, and personable. And our screen sharing has decided to taking a break. All right, I'll keep going. So then I want to share some of the quantitative data that we...
Just in case, since no one else is.
Okay, there you go. I want to point out some things that were really interesting to me when I looked through this report. These top 6 areas of expertise are broken out by those self-identified labels. So we have the parents and guardians. We had 425 people identify as that, the 149 staff members, 83 community members, 21 under other, and that very often could be grandparent, former teacher, taxpayer. People identify a little differently. Students, 18, and then 2 business owners or agriculture folks. And when I look at this, I love seeing collaborative leadership and budget and finance in the top 2 for the 4 largest groups. The parents, staff members, community members, and other all saw budget and finance and collaborative leadership as the top 2, which is phenomenal to have that kind of consistency. It's a very good sign. Then we also, and collaborative leadership number 1 for the business owners over there too. The other one, besides those 2 that I see in 5 of the 6, is the curriculum development and evaluation. It is in the top 6 for parents, for staff members, for community members, for other, and for students. So curriculum is something that is of interest to 5 of those 6 groups. And then you'll notice that diversity, equity, and inclusion are in the top 6 for staff members, community members, and students. And I think sometimes that those three words have become very politicized. Ultimately, when I was reading through comments from people in relationship to some of these issues here, I think what it boils down to is people are looking for a sense of belonging for the students. That no matter the differences between the students in any way, shape, or form, that they want to have a sense of belonging at Hastings Public Schools. And that came to the top for those three groups as well. And one of the things we always say with expertise, when you look at this list, everything they had to choose from is really important. We don't want people to say, well, it's not important, so I'm not going to pick it. Everything that is in that survey is important, but we need their help prioritizing, and that's what they did for us here. So that's the quantitative data on the areas of expertise. The personal characteristics, also a lot of alignment here on the next page. Honest and ethical was number one across the board for all 6 groups. Effective communicator was also in all 6 groups. A problem solver was in all 6 groups. This is highly unusual. I have to tell you that kind of similarities between groups is unusual.
I thought it was a typo at first when I read it.
Did you? It's just very consistent. So all 3 of those, the top 3 for all first 3 groups, are in all 6. Incredible. And then transparent is in 5 of your 6, and consistent is in 5 of your 6. That really is something special to have people looking for those characteristics so similar. Now, I want to point out your students really are looking for someone who's creative and has a sense of humor. And sometimes for adults, those don't always rise to the top because they feel like there's more, I hate to use the word important, but sometimes adults see it that way. And the student voice said, we want someone who is creative and funny. And so I think that is really interesting to see that as well. Hi, Director Davis.
It's like one of your parents. Put in the corner. Now you have to sit next to me.
Pattern recognizing.
So far, sense of humor. When we looked at the quantitative data broken out by respondent group, what struck me was the consistency among all of them. And I think the definitions sometimes of what they're looking for might be a little different because everyone's definition of consistent or a problem solver, we all have different interpretations of that, and yet it showed up again and again and again, 5 if not 6 times in all of those groups. You can see the previous experience being required or not. You can see that spelled out by different groups. Again, not a lot of variation, very similar with what the board was looking for. And then the top 6 specialized skills, this is what you based your hiring criteria decisions on. You took the survey with the 25 or 26 choices, and then we did wordsmith those to come up with a leadership profile in the brochure. The similarities, again, though, I'm just going to point out a couple of these here. All 6 groups identified the honesty and ethical across the board. So that is in all 6 groups. The next ones that were most common was finding someone who is visible and accessible to all of you. That was in 5 of the 6 groups. It was in their top 6. Also develops trust and works collaboratively with a diverse group of stakeholders. That was in 5 of 6 groups. So very similar there as well. And then we see that develop and direct an effective leadership team. That showed up in 4 of the groups in their top 6. Mediate and accommodating different perspectives showed up in 3 of the 6. So I would say by and large, when I look at my chicken scratches, I draw lines to see who connects to who. It's kind of like a puzzle in my mind. I'm seeing so much alignment amongst the groups and also with what you said that it's very encouraging for me working on the search. And again, these top 6 were out of the list of 27. So the fact that they are that close really bodes well for the rest of the search. Are there questions on the quantitative side of the report? That's the number crunching. Now we're going to get into the comments. No? Okay. And if you do think of one later, we'll circle back. So the additional comments are the qualitative or open-ended questions that we invited people to respond. There were no character limits. These are all anonymous again. People did not have to answer every question in order to be counted. So you'll see here that 475 of the 701 respondents did provide some sort of narrative to the open-ended questions, which is also very high. it's often less than half of the total number of respondents take the time to submit additional thoughts. And so that was really great. We did ask these 4 questions, and we're going to review them just one at a time. I'm only going to read the highlighted part and a couple of comments that maybe jumped out at me, but I will be happy to entertain questions as well. So when asked what are some of the good things taking place in Hastings Public Schools today, we had a lot of people point to the quality and the variety of your programs and extracurricular activities. Opportunities for students rose to the top by far with those open-ended questions. Students are receiving a quality education. It's a solid education system and extracurriculars at the high school. Strong academics plus additional programs keep the students interested and involved. And these comments are representative. Obviously, 228 people said something in this regards, and so these aren't everything, but they are enough that we feel address the heart of what people are trying to say with the appreciation for the programs and the extracurricular activities. Also, there was a theme that emerged clearly around your staff. They were referred to as dedicated, talented, and hardworking in Hastings Public Schools, and that is deeply appreciated. There are a lot of nice things said about how much the teachers care about the education and the students that they teach. We have amazing staff. They are talented, wonderful, high quality, dedicated, caring about the kids came across more than anything else in the responses to that question. A third trend on that question was that your stakeholders believe that the school here strives to be a welcoming and inclusive district, and that is trying to address student mental health needs and social emotional learning. And so there were many comments in that regards as well, calling you innovative. Students have the ability to be who they feel they are on the inside as well as the outside. Students are learning about different perspectives. There's increased mental health support, social emotional learning, inclusivity, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of good things about your district came through in that first question. And that's encouraging because there were a lot of responses to that question, and many of them I'm sure you are already aware of. It probably just confirms what you already feel is great about this district. The second question was, what challenges do you see for our district over the next 5 years? And this is where things get a little more, I say challenging, I guess, because people do tend to say, here is what I think lies ahead for us that's not great. And a lot of people find it easier to find things that are not great than things that are great, because I think as human beings, I know I take a lot of great things for granted, and yet when things are bothering me, I can think of them much more quickly. And sometimes we see that in the survey here as well. So there were some themes here. The first one I want to talk about is that the stakeholders see this community experiencing political divisiveness and conflict. And they feel that that has resulted in divergent views for the future of the school district. Some people would say fork in the road, those sorts of things. So there is polarization. Now, there were 3 themes under this theme, so I call them sub-themes, that really became clear. The first were a lot of comments about the divisiveness in the community. Some of the representative comments were, there are conflicting and strong opinions from community members about everything. It's causing chaos and a divide when we should be united. Division of opinions, but we need to come together for our students. All students should be at the center of everything that we do. And so I see, even though there were comments about divisiveness, there's a desire to unite. That was commonly felt as well. The second sub-theme in this area about challenges was there was a clear desire to increase the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that are already underway. Folks said things such as, we need to accept and include those that are different. Students need to feel not only safe, but supported in our schools. We should be inclusive for all students. And then the third theme under this first category is there was a desire to focus on education and keep the politics out of schools. Refocusing our schools on the core components of education: reading, writing, math, science, logic, and reasoning. Keeping political conflicts out of school so children can focus on learning. And keeping politics out of the school. A lot of people pointed to that. So I would say under the divisiveness and the conflict with those divergent views, those are the 3 themes we saw. And oftentimes, though, I think it's open to interpretation, because I really think everyone would like to keep politics per se out of school. There is disagreement about how to do that and what that might mean and what that might look like. So the good news is people seem to want the same thing, and people seem to want to focus on students. How to do that is where there seems to be some different philosophies about education in Hastings. So those were the challenges, opportunities and challenges for growth here, I think. So then the next theme beyond that first one that I want to focus on is people are concerned about the enrollment here and the decreasing enrollment and how it will affect your finances. 168 people mentioned that. They pointed to changes of enrollment and competition with other districts, declining enrollment resulting in declining funding, meeting the challenges of declining enrollment. And so that theme was echoed, I think, over and over again with those folks who were concerned about it. There was another challenge identified on the next page. Survey responses indicate a concern about the increase in negative student behavior. So in terms of what that means, people did point out that COVID may have caused social challenges that show up in schools as an increase in poor behaviors, that student behaviors and frustrations are high, and the increase of student behaviors has become exhausting to teachers and staff. So negative student behavior is a theme. And there was also a theme identified, this is the last one in this category of challenges, that the community would really like the school board to work together to focus on the students and to provide an opportunity for stakeholders to be heard. There were some comments here about cohesiveness with the board regarding the direction of the district. Sounds like people are hungry for that, however that might look. Cohesiveness would be good. The next page, there's a couple of comments that your school board needs to focus on working for the students and not for their own individual views. And a cohesive, productive school board who works together and positively contributes to our kids' experiences and supports our teachers is something people would really like to see. That is the summary of the challenges. And then this question always gets a lot of responses about what does the new superintendent need to know about the history of the school district and the community in order to be successful. And in this regards, there were four themes. Am I going too fast or are we good? Okay, so the first theme with the most responses, that a lot of people who answered this question felt that the next superintendent should know Hastings was once a rural and agriculture-based community, but it's quickly growing into a diverse and suburban town. And there was a lot of acknowledgments of the changes that are underway. We are a community of rural, suburban, and city folk, each with different gifts, talents, needs, and wants. Also that a small town culture and relationships are important and are valued here. We are big enough to have access to many things and yet small enough to be different. It's a very unique community in terms of its size, its demographics, and its location, both rural and suburban. And people pointed to that and thought the new superintendent should know and understand that as well. This summed it up really well, I thought. Originally, we were a small farming community, but it's become more of a suburb, and this leads to a change in the ethnic and socioeconomic demographics. Then there was a trend in this category that indicates a desire for the next superintendent of Hastings to be visible and transparent with strong communication skills, and that all voices be included and respected across the district. So in this terms, this area, some of the people shared things such as someone should be transparent and open. They should work with the staff and create relationships with them. Also needs to be transparent with the community and with parents. And this one, if you put the kids first and what is best for their education, that is what matters most. Again, a lot of comments in all of these categories about your students. You care deeply as a community about your students. At the top of the next page, there was a trend that they feel the new superintendent should know that the political divisiveness and conflict is apparent to your stakeholders, and they would like the new superintendent to help unify the district. In the comments around this, we heard a lot of hope and a lot of indication for healing. Someone here said that they would like the superintendent to work to make sure all students feel understood and heard. I hope the new superintendent can be a bridge in closing the divide. So I believe a bridge builder is something your stakeholders would appreciate. And that Hastings is at a point where rumor and innuendo have thwarted the advancement of education. There were a lot of comments in that regards as well. And then the fourth category in terms of understanding the history of the community and the district is that the community really wants the next superintendent to understand they have a history of supporting the district. That goes back a long ways. But some people are struggling to continue the support due to the current climate. We love our town and have a lot of pride in it, and our schools and our kids. There's a lot of pride here, a lot of tradition, and no question. Overall, the district has a good historical track record of working together for the good of all students. Unfortunately, politics have caused the community to be split into two. We need to get back to being one. So again, I think an understanding of the history and where this community and stakeholders have been looking to unite the district is desired by your stakeholders. And then in the additional comments area, it's wide open. What else do you want to tell us? And the thing that came through loud and clear in that was really just one thing, that they would like Hastings School District's next superintendent to have strong leadership skills. And strong leadership skills is another one of those squishy phrases that could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What we tend to see when people say that is that they're looking for soft skills in addition to the hard skills. So they may already assume the superintendent has some background in the competencies you need to be a superintendent in the state of Minnesota, finance, legislation, some of those things that can be learned. They're looking for some of the intuitive things, such as someone who is savvy, sense of their own leadership identity, who encourages creativity, values input, conversational skills, creates positive cultures, is fair, professional, confident, strong, humble, and gentle, and a good listener. Those are things that are not traditionally taught. And so soft skills have risen to the top for the Hastings search, I feel, in addition to hard skills. And then I added a bonus summary because your students had a lot to say, and I thought you deserved to see this, as student-centered as you are. So we asked your students the same questions because they took the same survey. And those who responded in terms of the good things taking place in Hastings Public Schools, they pointed to the classes, that there are more meetings for minority groups, which helps them find connection. And I think that word connection goes back to the sense of belonging people were looking for, that there's lots of different extracurriculars. The school is taking serious things more seriously. There are opportunities to be part of the community. And I love the last statement under this one, students help each other. I love that. I think that's beautiful. As far as the challenges, the students who responded to the survey did point out some things. Student happiness, they feel, will be a challenge for the district over the next 5 years. The stress levels are getting worse. Mental health is getting worse. They pointed to conflicts between students. And as far as that question over the history of the school district and the community, the second one here, that all students have lives and need help every little while. The honesty of that statement just, it's wonderful. And the last statement in that one, too, to sum it up, I'd say this is great. From a student's mouth, the kids here sometimes will need help, but they don't know how to ask for help, or they are afraid. Additional comments, food is always real important to your students. We do see the food cropping up in just about every student response we get in every district. You're not alone in that regards. Make it a safe space. And I added the mission and your core purpose because I think it's fitting to wrap up your summary with we care, we empower, we achieve. Students are the heart of all we do. So that concludes my overview of the stakeholder summary report. Again, a lot of participation, a lot of honesty. We do not only provide you with the sunshine and roses because there are always things that are not going very well. And we feel it's important to respect the voice of the stakeholders and share all of those with you as well. So those are the trends that we saw. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the survey, and we can also talk about next steps when you're ready to do that.
Does anybody have any questions with regard Does anybody have any questions with regard to the survey at this time? Director Mull?
I mean, it's not so much a question as it is a comment. I am not surprised by this response. I take that back. I was a little bit surprised by the unity in responses, which is it leaves me optimistic. But the responses, the concerns, and then the great things that we celebrate in Hastings, those did not surprise me at all.
I guess I just thought it was interesting in looking at who wanted previous experience as a superintendent and who didn't think it was as important. It was a direct flip between parents and staff members. And then community members was an even 50-50. So I thought that was interesting, coming from the inside versus outside perspective.
I'll look away from the screen because it's kind of giving me vertigo. As we get back to the top, are there any other comments with regard to the stakeholder survey? I just want to say this is invaluable. I think it's easy to dismiss it can be easy to dismiss a survey and think, oh, yeah. But when I look at the number of people who took the time to respond and the number of people who took the time to write a response, and many of these are so heartfelt. They're so heartfelt, and they're so accurate, and they're so honest. It just feels like such a comprehensive touchstone. And again, I too was struck not by the range of interpretations of what's happening, but that focus on students and that hopefulness and that desire to be unified. We all can recognize that path is going to be different for when you talk to different people, but just holding that common goal is so encouraging. If we don't have any other comments with regard to the stakeholder survey at this time, I would ask Ms. Dorn to lead us through the next topic.
So my first question, now that you have seen it and had the opportunity to ask questions, is we always recommend placing this on your district website and in board book, because I think your stakeholders want to know they were heard and see all of these results, and your candidates are going to want to read through this. They very often go to the website hoping to get a glimpse of what your stakeholders are seeking. So I would suggest that, but I wanted the board to decide and discuss it as well to see if it's something you'd like to put on your website and in board book.
Does anybody have any comments? I see Director Dressley is nodding. Does anybody else? I see.
It's honest.
Yeah. All right. It looks like we don't maybe need a lot of discussion. It looks like we have unanimity across the room of putting this information on our website. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, the next thing I'd like to say is I want you to leave, I'd like you to make a decision before we leave, and ideally right now, based upon the stakeholder survey report, about the interviews themselves, round 1 and round 2 interviews. I think I mentioned this during the first meeting, during the planning meeting. You will have 3 options for your interviews, and typically, if stakeholders will be involved in the interview process, it's in the second round when you have your finalists, not your semifinalists. So your 3 choices, to sum it up, would be to craft interview committees who would interview the candidates in round 2 separately from the school board's interviews. And that's how many districts did it in the past. Things did shift over COVID because it was difficult to have interview committees do everything online. Still can do it, so that's an option. And we'll talk through who might be on that if that's of interest to the board. The second option is to have stakeholders observe the board interviews of your finalists and provide you with input on their strengths and their opportunities for growth as a candidate in your interview, the school board's interview. And that would be designated stakeholders, not anyone who just shows up, because they need to be trained, and we need to talk about that kind of input and how to provide feedback on strengths and weaknesses in a respectful manner. And then the third option is to use the stakeholder summary report as the voice of the stakeholders for the entirety of the search, including interview questions, but also your deliberations about who to bring in for the first round, bring back for the second round, and to hire for the ultimate position. So all three of those are up for discussion. The one thing I can share with you are the trends we've seen in the last 2 years, because it has been changing. Some of the more traditional methodologies, and we did talk about this relative to the focus groups when we were doing the survey, to be more inclusive of everyone, level the playing field, versus individual focus groups with some people, but not everyone. What we've seen the last 2 years, we've done about 52 searches in 2 years. We've had one district do interview committees, and in that case, they had 2 committees, one of community members and staff and community members and parents, and one of staff, and then the board. So there were 3 interviews going on at one time. So one of the 52 chose that. About 15 to 20 of those interviews had the input from stakeholders during the board's interview. So they watched your interview, took notes, and submitted a form that we then pulled together and gave the board prior to deliberations. And the remaining people have gone with the stakeholder survey report as the voice of the stakeholders. And so that's the largest trend we've seen. That would be probably 35 districts have chosen that. You can do whatever's right for Hastings, but that's just what the demographics have been telling us the last few years relative to stakeholder involvement. And I asked a couple of boards that I was surprised they chose the report, because they wanted to be as inclusive as possible to make sure that all stakeholders' voices were heard. And I said, a little surprised with that, because I was expecting there to be some disagreement about that at this point. And so despite the fact that they were a split board on many ways, they did choose this. And that, I always want to do a little research and find out, why did you decide that and how did that work? And what I heard from most people is they felt like the report was so thorough as far as who got to be heard. It's different than the elevating some stakeholders, because really when you have interview committees, you don't want more than maybe 6 to 8 people on each of those. So you're limited to 12 to 16 people versus 700. And so for them, it felt like it was more fair to folks to rely on a broader perspective than selecting people to be on a narrower committee. That was just their choice. And yet the district that did the interview committees felt that by having representative groups interview the people, that district felt that that fit them better. So ultimately, you really need to choose what's best for your district. So if you have questions, let me know, but I really would appreciate a decision on that tonight, because it's going to involve some decisions for us in terms of facilitating the logistics of your interview days based on what you choose tonight. Okay.
I'm curious, what did this board do for the last hiring or 2, and how did that go?
Do you want to jump in? Yeah, so we were right as stuff was closing down. And so we had gone online and we were trying to figure out how to do the stakeholder engagement. We used a stakeholder survey. I don't believe we had this level of response. Maybe Director Beisel seems to remember it was maybe half. We had a lower level of response. So this is, to me, again, this is just amazing. But we used this process, and given that a substantive portion of our selection was done online when none of us were super capable of being online, we hadn't demonstrated competency yet, I think it was really a sound base. Could you share maybe your experience, Director Malone, and what your take on it was?
Other than it being a blur. Yeah, it was, I know, it was a process. I'd have to go back and take a look at our notes, because we were dealing with a lot. Correct. I thought there was a separate committee. No, I'm thinking of wasn't there like stakeholder group halls, or like the hall? Yeah. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
I remember this really well, because spring of 2020, Hastings was the first search that when the world shut down, everything needed to go online. And Becky and I worked very, very closely together to make sure that we were able to still maintain the integrity of the search with the intention that they had. So there were interview committees set up, planning to meet in person. Prior to that, there had been listening sessions held throughout the community. So locations at the schools, like a Thursday evening somewhere in the community, those were not really well attended. They were pretty sparsely attended. And we had one of our service providers going from location to location to meet with people, informal listening sessions. So early in this process, when we talked about why the surveys have become much more, more people have taken them, that came out of the pandemic. Because it used to be, you could take the survey, or you could go to a listening session, or you could go to a focus group for business community. There's several choices, and so it kind of diluted the responses, and some people did both or all three, and some people did one. But during the pandemic, we tried to do those focus groups and listening sessions online at first. And we were past yours. Yours were done. But for other searches that were starting up in April, we did listening sessions, did not go well. So we started driving people to that survey and only the survey, and that's when the numbers went way up. And more people were saying more things and being more candid about it because it was anonymous. Listening sessions and focus groups aren't anonymous. So the transparency and the candid responses went way up. So we decided to keep that. And that's why in the early stages, we recommend, at least from our process perspective, it's a bit of an outdated methodology to do focus groups because the survey can reach far more people, and you don't know who's who, so everyone's voice matters the same. Now, at the other end, the interviews, you were doing it the way that we always used to do it, which was you didn't have the choice to have people observe your interviews or rely on the stakeholder report, because everyone just assumed interview committees was the way to do it, and that's the way all the search firms did it 3 years ago. That's what everybody was doing. So that's what we were doing with you. When everything shut down, we did them online, thanks to Becky and her technical skills. It worked. We still got some feedback. Your response rate, though, was much, much lower on your survey that year. But I remember it because it was our first one, and we learned on you, and I really appreciated the chance to do that. It went pretty well. It was frustrating, though, because in-person is always preferable, and we wanted your interviews to be in person, and they weren't. Everyone was tired. Technology kept crashing. It was just kind of frustrating. But you made it through, and you did a great job. So that's what I remember. I don't know, Director Tate, if that answered your question, but it's what I remember. Okay.
Thank you.
I really appreciate in person, but maybe I'm old school, and I would like there to be, having the separate interview committee or the designated stakeholders interview. And I'm looking at here, so the few things were running through my mind is that, with the community engagement committee, the individuals that were or are, I don't know what the composition looks like, because we're revamping that right now. But the individuals that were on that committee, I think there were 12, and they were individuals that represented the community. A lot of diverse voices, a lot of different perspectives. But then taking a look at the 6 groups here, if we were to do something, it would be, the parent, guardian, staff member, community member, other, I don't know what that we'd have to hone that down, or maybe it's just the 5 student and then business owners. If we were to do something like that, this is just me, because I like to have that outside perspective, or not outside, still the inside perspective, because it's community perspective, but to allow them to have a voice through the interview process. How we select those individuals, though, that's where I'm really struggling. And I don't know what that looks like also with the time crunch. So unless they're identified like right now, I don't know how we pull it off.
There's 2 concerns that I would have. One is logistical, in that, we're going to want to make a decision about whom we want to pursue further almost immediately. And getting that feedback quickly is challenging. And because it's a public event, it can be concerning if the feedback that we're getting is very contrary to what we thought, felt, and believed. And secondly, I'm more concerned about who's not on the group or who's not represented in that selection for the group than who is, because given that the survey clearly indicated the sense of divisiveness in the community, I'm afraid that almost no matter who we pick, there will be people that feel like they're underrepresented, and I think that it's opening up a can of worms.
Go ahead. I'll just point out that we had a couple board members nodding in agreement with that assessment. Director Dressley.
I'll just state it for the record. I agree. I think that it's no matter who is picked, they're going to be, and I don't think that we sitting around this table today could decide which people were picked and all agree on it. So, I mean, I think it would be a really hard thing to agree on.
So I agree with what Director Zuzek said. I am very impressed with the survey, and 701 people completed it. So without having the divisiveness in the community, I think people who really wanted to take their time and tell us, it's all right here. I do like people coming in, but then again, who do you pick? When do you pick it? We're not all going to agree on it. So I like this. People were honest, open. This is how I can help with the search.
I think there's a couple voices at the table. Director Davis, and do you have a perspective you'd like to share on how we can engage and listen to stakeholders? If you want to think a minute, I can share my perspective. I'll go. I guess I would echo what Director Zuzek said. I think one of the things that I've really tried hard to learn over my time on the board is, and I'm a, show up and be in the room and let's have that conversation kind of person. I'm much more comfortable with, just pick up the phone and call, but there are a lot of people that get left out, and just how you would identify the range of voices that are captured here and capture them into 10 to 16 people just does not feel like it would likely be, it just doesn't feel like it would be successful. I think if we commit as a board to remember that this is the stakeholder voice, and if we hold each other accountable through the process of our questioning, identifying our interview questions, we hold ourselves accountable in evaluating each candidate's response and hold these perspectives in a spotlighted position, that will be the most representative way to hear the range of voices. So I just don't see how else we get this many voices in the room unless we use that survey as the method. Director Davis.
I feel like our survey needs to be the base, because if we use anything else, we're going to end up disenfranchising some group. One group or another is going to be disenfranchised. So I think the survey acts as the best base. And then in terms of our interviewing process, utilizing the entire board as the interview panel is probably the way to go, because again, you end up with everybody having at least an opportunity to participate, and that's probably the most transparent and even-handed way of going at it.
I do have one question. So when we do the first round of interviews, we do them, and then do we decide that day who? Okay, so there's no gap between interviews to get community feedback in any way. Okay. Before we all started talking, I was open to options 2 or 3. And after listening to everybody, I think going with option 3 is probably the best choice here.
Director Malm, do you feel comfortable with that decision? Okay, option 3 is the use of the stakeholder engagement survey, just for clarity of those that are following along. All right, so it looks like we have my understanding is that we have a unanimous support for using a stakeholder survey as a method for engaging the stakeholders in the process. And I will just say to whomever's listening or rewatching this later, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being reflective, and thank you for being honest. I think it's invaluable.
All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate that conversation. I'm hoping that each of you, because you all have different connections within the community, that as you read that report, you heard the people that you feel wanted to be heard, that you heard them within that report. And I think that's really positive. And trust me, we will bring up the stakeholder survey report a lot between now and the conclusion of this process. Tonight, for one, when we get to the interview questions, but also as you go through selecting your candidates to be interviewed, that'll be candidates A, B, C, et cetera. We'll refer back to what your stakeholders said they were looking for, in addition to your leadership profile. And after you have completed your interviews, we'll do it after round one. As you deliberate who to bring back for round two, we'll remind you what your stakeholders are looking for. And finally, that last decision of who to make an offer to, we'll mention it again. So thank you for that. I appreciate the conversation. So the next thing we need to move on to is the interview training. And so you have in front of you an abbreviated packet because the full packet is 60-some pages, and I didn't want to print all of those. So I'm going to take you through these as Becky screen shares for me. But the purpose of interview training is to make sure you're comfortable with what's going to happen on those dates. Also to make sure that you are following state statute in terms of what you can and can't ask and so on and so forth. So the first couple of things in this packet are your are your vacancy brochure, the hiring brochure, which is out there right now with the leadership profile included. And the deadline for applications is tonight at midnight. So I do want to do a real quick plug for the fact that the day after tomorrow, you will receive access to the application materials. We are the only search firm in the state that believes school boards should have access to see all of those materials because you're the hiring authority. And we do that because we think it's important you know who's applied, and you can decide for yourself who you want to bring in. We'll still do our due diligence and our vetting and our pre-interviews and bring forth a recommended slate. You have already, however, seen those folks. So you can ask us why we aren't recommending candidate D or something like that. And we'll do our best to answer because it's a lot of private data. So the second reason we ask that you look through those is we feel it's important, yes, you look, but we also trust board members to handle private data. So there'll be instructions when you get access to the cloud. That's where they all are up there in the cloud. It'll be your own password, your own username. Don't share those. Don't look at the applications in a coffee shop for people who can look over your shoulder at your computer. Do not print them, screenshot them. Don't even look at them on your kitchen table because your family's going to walk behind you, and if they see a resume, they're going to know who's applied, and you've instantly violated data practices law. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that will be day after tomorrow. And yes, you do have applications, so don't worry about that, okay? All right, so the vacancy brochure is in there, and then the timeline. And in the timeline, you'll see that tonight is April 24th, that we are doing all of these activities. On the 26th, you'll review the applications until May 10th, because on May 10th, that's the night we're coming here to recommend the finalists that we suggest you interview, keeping in mind, though, that you're the board and you will choose who to interview. You're not going to have to choose who we recommend. That'll be on May 10th, and then we'll finalize the questions that night. And then your interviews are currently scheduled for the day of May 16th. The time was to be determined. The starting time is going to depend on how many people you choose to bring in for round one. We've had as few as 3 people interviewed in round one, and we've had as many as 8. The average is probably 5 or 6 people, but you want to take a look through the pool first and see who you feel is really, really, truly capable of being the leader here. And then we'll know more about the timing for that day. And I have a tentative schedule that we'll talk about tonight, depending upon how many folks you want to bring in. That'll be a long day. You'll need to come well rested. There'll need to be some food provided because you need to concentrate as much for the last interview as you do for the first interview. Those of you who did this before remember how exhausting it is to pay that close of attention to every interview. And your second round, May 23rd, that has been set for 4 o'clock. because you will probably interview 2 or 3 people that day, and you'll make a decision that night about who to make an offer to, and then hopefully you'll be able to approve a contract on May 31st. But you never know. Things come up. That's the timeline and the vacancy brochure. So any questions on those 2 things? You've seen them before, so I won't belabor the point. All right, so we want to move into relevant law. This is the one that we always want to make sure board members are very aware of what you can and cannot ask about. There are protected categories that you cannot ask questions about, nor try to ask a question that gets at the heart of the matter while still sort of skating that thin line. We want to be real careful because you are an equal employment opportunity employer. You need to be really careful about the protected categories. You can see them listed there in the first blue box. Some of them are common sense. You can't ask people, for instance, about their age, their marital status, their race, veteran status. You can't ask about any of those things. And so we'll give you some examples in the next couple of pages. If for some reason you want to ask things in that arena, there's a way to ask it that's permissible, and there's a ways not to ask it. So on page 3, when it talks about interview questions and non-discrimination laws, the entire process needs to be aware of these things. So, for instance, I really don't like any of the permissible to ask, but if for some reason, we'll turn to the next page that says age, number 4. You know, you don't know how old someone is by looking at them. You can guess, but you can't ask, when do you plan to retire? Because that's getting at their age. If it's really important to you, you could say, so what are your long-term career goals? And they may answer it, but that's one of those questions that really skates around the boundaries of protected categories. So because you have so many other things to ask about, I would encourage you that when you look at these categories, just don't even ask any of them. Maybe you're curious. It's really not applicable to the position. So try to avoid those things. We will, of course, only recommend questions that are legal. And if you have other questions you'd like to ask, and we can come up with those later, if they're not legal, I won't let you ask them. And one of the things that people love to ask, it's not in a protected category, and I mentioned this in the Q&A if you watched it, people really like to ask if people plan to come to the community and live here or live within the district boundaries, and you can't ask that. It's not a protected class, but it's in state statute. You can't require residency for a superintendent. You could for a firefighter or someone like that that needs to be able to respond very quickly to the downtown area, the city center. However, for this position, they could do their job even if they're commuting from somewhere far away. It's up to you to define what that job description is and what the goals and expectations are for performance. And if they can do it while living 2 hours away, you can't tell them they can't have the job. Did you have a question, Director Desley?
Do we have to pay for their commute if they live 2 hours away, like their wear and tear on their vehicle or any of that? That would all be in the contract, I'd assume.
It's in the contract. You don't have to.
Okay.
Sometimes districts will provide that. Sometimes someone may ask for moving expenses because they do plan to move here and they may live far, far away, so they may want a stipend toward moving expenses. All of that is negotiable, but no, you don't have to. Okay, great question. So there's a whole bunch of pages here that you can go past, and I want to get to policy. And on the policies, I think there are only a couple of pages in this one that I really want to highlight, because the first one is the Equal Employment Opportunity Policy, Model Policy 401, which I know you have adopted. Oh, that's not in here. Okay. So there's no policies. So I'm going to ask Becky, because she has the full packet here, on this policy, if you would, oh, there's only 2 pages. I don't have anything highlighted. Okay, common sense, don't break the law. Be an equal employment opportunity. There you go. That's a district policy. That's the takeaway. It's all we really care. So the next one, though, is the personnel data, Model Policy 406. So on this one, Becky, if you could turn to page 12. Okay, skip down to page. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. There we go. So I always want to point this out. This is in this model policy, that the names of applicants are private data, except when they become finalists for an employment position. So the names of applicants are private data, except when they become finalists for an employment position. Now scooch backward 2 pages to page 10, and it defines finalist. A finalist means an individual who is selected to be interviewed by the school board for a position. So that night, when you identify who you're going to interview, after that at the end of that meeting, the names will go public of who you are interviewing. That means they're a finalist. Statute does not differentiate between a semifinalist and a finalist. So we will, in our press releases, call round 1 people semifinalists and round 2 finalists. However, the minute you've decided to interview them, their name will go public. Well, not the minute, because we have to wrap up the meeting, but their name goes public that night. Now, sometimes we'll call and congratulate them, and the Hastings Public School Board would like to invite you for an interview. They may withdraw that night. Their name has still gone public. All right, these applicants know, as part of the application process, they sign something that says, I understand that if selected to be interviewed, my name will go public. So even if they withdraw the night I call them, it's too late. Their name is still in the press release, even if they pull out.
We did have that happen.
Did you? Oh, that's right. You did. So it can happen. Most people have looked at your timeline, and sometimes it's a delicate operation, as you can understand, in Minnesota, because they're committed to a school district and yet they're really interested in yours. So the minute their name goes public, their board knows that they're open to moving away from that district. So sometimes they'll call me the day of the finalists being selected and say, I changed my mind. I want to be pulled out of the pool. I need it in writing before I can do that. They need to send me an email to confirm that they are withdrawing from your pool. I don't just take them on their word when they call me. And then we would let you know candidate F has withdrawn from the pool. So that night, that name stays private. Okay? Any questions on this policy and when those names go public?
I don't have a question on when the names go public, but on that scenario, so it has happened from a timing perspective that somebody calls the day of the interviews, maybe in the morning, and says, I've changed my mind, and they'll withdraw probably both from the interview and being considered as a finalist. Okay. I don't think we ever had that happen. From that night, but not from that morning saying, like, candidate C is not going to come. We didn't have that, but it could happen. And in that case, that candidate's name, even if all of us prior to the interview had considered them a highly desirable candidate, out is out.
Out is out. And sometimes it's because they've accepted another position. And sometimes it's because they've changed their mind. Sometimes it's because their family circumstances have changed and they no longer want to move to this area if they were planning on moving, which we won't ask about. You never quite know why. I always just tell boards, don't take it personally, because these candidates are human beings with lots of lives and lots of decisions to be made. Sometimes the stars don't align for your timeline or your position. So, all right, so if someone is going around telling people they've applied for the position and they're very excited because they just can't wait to see if they get an interview, if you're asked in the grocery store, hey, I heard, Sue Jones told me she applied for the position. Is that true? You as a board member must say, I can't confirm that. I'm sorry, that's private data. And if that person then is not named a finalist, they usually are a little embarrassed that they put the word out far and wide that they had applied, because they don't know if they're going to get an interview or not. And yet that's their choice. If they want to tell people they applied, they can certainly do that. You as board members, though, are bound by data privacy to not confirm or deny it. Just no comment. No comment's a really good one. Okay? So, all right.
And just to be clear, that continues into the future. So if you get past the selection and there is somebody that's made it public that they applied, or you get stopped by somebody and say, hey, I heard so-and-so applied. I know you picked this other person, but were they in the pool? What did you think of them? You never get to talk about it. You never get to tell the story of that person, even if they're telling their story.
Absolutely correct. Once you're past that point, you just wipe the names of the applicants from memory. We will still give you access to Revelis. That's where you'll go to see these applications. You'll have access to those things in the cloud all the way through your second round of interviews. So you could go look and revisit at any point during the interview process. You just have to remember that the people you didn't pick to be interviewed are still in there. You just don't talk about them because they weren't picked to be interviewed. Okay? So there's one more policy I want to touch on just a moment. It's page 18, Becky. It is the open meetings and closed meeting policy 205. I have mentioned this earlier at the planning meeting. Every portion of this process is done in an open session. The only time you can close a meeting relative to your superintendent is for performance evaluations. So if you look at the closed meeting section of this policy, you can close it for superintendent evaluation. It does not mention superintendent search or hiring process anywhere in here. So this is where we are. And it was interesting, I've got peers across the country at school board associations that do the same work I do. It's interesting the differences in open meeting laws across states. Absolutely incredible. There are plenty of states that every step of this process is done in a closed session until you announce a successful contract with a new superintendent. 100% in closed session, so nobody knows who else you're interviewing. And then there are states that the second someone hits apply on the position, their name goes public, that they applied. It is the two extremes of open meeting law and access. It's just unbelievable. So I think we're sort of in the middle ground where there's some data privacy issues, not everything, but I think candidates in Minnesota understand when their name goes public. But boy, imagine applying for a job and everyone knows. Newspapers can go to the website and find out who's applied and start writing articles about the applicants before the board even deliberates who to hire, or interview, I mean. It's just crazy. All right, so that's it, open and closed meetings. All of these pages are pages that you didn't need, but they are in your electronic copy that I sent to you in all of your emails if you want to look at the policies. So now we're going to get to what you have in your abbreviated packet. Common interview mistakes, page 27. I won't go through all of these. They're just some reminders about the interview process. So page 27. You don't need to worry about incomplete selection criteria. You've done a really good job with your hiring criteria and leadership profile. You also have a really thorough stakeholder report. So you know what you're looking for as far as criteria. You know what those priorities are. I do always remind boards that this is a two-way interview. Candidates are interviewing you as much as you are interviewing them. They want to make sure it's right for them and for their strengths and their circumstances or their family. So when they ask you questions, and we'll talk more about that, please share with them your perspectives as board members. They like to see how you work together as a board. They also are picking up vibes from the board. And so we really want you to be authentic and yet smile and nod and thank them for answering questions. If they just feel like it is cold or standoffish or uncomfortable, even if we offer them a second interview, they may decline. We've had a couple of people do that where I just didn't get a good feeling from the board. I don't think it would be a good fit for me and them to work together. So just be yourselves, but also be positive. I'm going to jump ahead to notes, number 8. Incomplete notes are a mistake because you're going to be talking to a lot of people about a lot of things, and you need to try to remember who's who. So you can take notes on the applications for starters. If you want to review, let's say you have 10 applications and you're reviewing them and you're jotting down notes about, Sam Smith, and you're jotting down things that jump out at you. I usually say if I were a board member, I would, take a first glance through their materials. Obviously, you want to read their cover letter, their resume, their letters of recommendation, how they answered those questions very specific to Hastings. And then in my head, I would think yes, no, or maybe. There's definitely some yeses. Maybe there's a couple definite no's. And then I'm going to spend some time on the maybes and look deeper at their application and go through their work history a little more deeply, that kind of thing. So when you're doing that, write down your reasons that you want to interview Sam Smith. Jot them down. However, your notes are subject to a data request. So you will be turning them in to your HR department when this is all over, and they'll be filing them in accordance with your data retention policies. And personnel data is retained differently than other data. So keep your notes, which then says, make sure you write things down that will help you remember who's who during the screening of applications and during the interviews. Do not write down anything that is a protected class. Makes sense, right? Because if you're noting the fact that middle-aged woman. So you remember who that is after their first interview. Well, I'm sorry, you just broke 2 laws. So don't write that down. Use common sense in your notes that it's not something that someone could, upon asking for your notes, file a discrimination claim because you noted something about them that is in a protected class. Okay? But do take notes, please, because they'll all start to blend together, especially doing all of them in one day on that first round. And then number 10, accepting the wrong fit. You do not need to settle. And we talked about this at the planning meeting. If you don't find the right leader for Hastings, we're going to help you find an interim, keep the wheels on the bus for a year, start up the search again next year, probably in December or January, at no cost. So don't accept the wrong fit. And then the other mistake people sometimes make is they don't check their bias at the door. And so I do want to talk a little bit about implicit bias here next, but are there any questions on the interview mistakes?
I'd like to ask what I think is a clarifying question with regard to the notes. So in a few days, 2 days maybe, we'll gain access to Revelis and we'll be able to review the candidates and start to consider who we would want to interview and rank them. And maybe we're taking notes in our secure private space where we're reviewing this data. So those documents, those notes need to be kept and brought into HR. So just want to clarify that those all come in, and it's under everybody's personal integrity that you would bring in what you actually wrote. And you don't keep, copies are not kept. You don't keep copies, they're turned into HR. Okay, thank you.
Is there an identifiable number on them, or will they be in the same order as when we start? I mean, just like, because if you go through and you go A, B, C, and D, and then the next day you go in there and they're all in a different order, that's going to screw up what you're looking at.
Like your view is different than mine. Yeah.
That's a great question. They will be, they'll be in the same order because it's usually alphabetical order in Revelis. We will, however, let you know who candidate A is, who B is, and who C is. We have a key with the name and the letter, name, letter, name, letter. And then actually on the day that we're coming to visit with you and recommend candidates, I will that day send you that same list and I'll highlight the ones we're going to be recommending. And I don't want to do it too far in advance because I don't want that floating around out there in any way. But I will email you with a BCC because we don't want conversations on email about this. You'll each get that highlighted list so you'll know, oh, MSB is going to recommend candidate B, C, L, and M. And then it'll give you a couple of hours or so to maybe go back and look at B, C, L, and M a little more deeply. And so you'll have that, and then I'll bring copies of that list that night to share with you, but then I'm going to collect them back that night and shred that list as well. Okay, so yeah, you'll know who A, B, C, D are because you don't want to be working off two different lists.
I just have a question. I remember like we could write previous experience, but I can't write 15 years. I can write that, but I can't write the school that they're at, right? I can just write 15 years principal, 2 years assistant, but I can't write where they've been at, but I can do the other stuff.
Correct. Anything that would identify them to someone who came across your notes. You know, if you said, currently associate superintendent at Lake Crystal Welcome Memorial, someone could Google it, figure out who that person is. And so you want to be careful. It's not something that could be traced. We're just trying to protect the identities of these people, again, because of the sensitivity of their current job.
But you could still write current.
Current, you bet. Current superintendent, current associate, past principal, international experience, things like that, you bet. Great questions, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to implicit bias for a moment. This next page called What is Bias is from the Oregon School Boards Association. And we started including this 2 years ago in our interview training because it became very apparent that during board deliberations, people were bringing their own life experiences and opinions into the deliberation about things that were really truly irrelevant. And I'll just give you a couple of examples and then you'll know exactly what we're talking about. I'm not going to read through this. For example, I was at a deliberation with a board for their final 2 candidates, and they were both outstanding people, just outstanding. One was a man, one was a woman. And during deliberations, we encouraged the board to speak positively to strengths and not to focus on deficits, because very often these are being live streamed or recorded during deliberations, and you don't want to damage someone's career by criticizing their performance in the interview. So we try to keep it positive. And there was this one board member that said, by then obviously people know names, they've been interviewed, right? And this one board member said, you know, I really liked Joe. I thought Joe had a strong personality, strong leadership skills. He would do really well in this community. And there was head nodding in agreement. And then they went around and then they started talking about the next person, Sue Smith. The exact same board member said, well, you know what? I thought Sue had a really strong personality, and I think it's going to rub people the wrong way in our community. She's just not really going to fit in here. So that was the clearest example of gender bias I've ever seen. That was easy, right? This is a pass-fail. You know that one. That's pretty clear. And what that person was saying in his experience is a strong personality is an asset in a man. A strong personality in a woman is a deficit. And that is not something we want to have happen here in Hastings. So please check the gender bias at the door with any preconceived notions, because there are women today, and there's a lot of groups out there talking about the disparity of women to men in superintendent roles. It has a long history. And oftentimes it's due to the strength of their personality and people not liking that. It's unfortunate because there's some outstanding people that could be tremendous leader if they got a shot, and yet gender bias. Okay, sorry. So that was one. Here's another one. This interview was 2 years ago, and they had 3 finalists, and the top 2 were clear, were 2 individuals. One was older, one was younger. I'll just say that. That's all I can say in terms of their age. And a board member said, gosh, you know what? I'll bet he's really good on social media. Guess which one he was talking about? The younger one. And about the older candidate, unfortunately, the same board member said, I don't know if they're tech savvy enough to be able to keep up with what we're looking for social media. And the reason that was unfortunate is I was looking at profiles, and you would not believe the amount of tweeting the older candidate did, regularly tweeting, regularly posting, blogging, and the younger candidate had a Facebook page. And that was all. So as far as their tech savvy familiarity levels, the older candidate was by far more qualified. And so they made assumptions. Bias is another word for assumptions. You just don't want to do that. So be careful of age, gender. Another one that we've seen cropping up in the last year more often than not, and you're in a unique situation, I don't think you'd see it as much, is a rural-urban bias. We've had great candidates from the metro looking for work in greater Minnesota, and there's board members that just won't consider them because they're from a big district. And similarly, districts in the metro won't interview strong candidates from small rural districts. They make assumptions about these people based on nothing but where they work. And so that geographic divide is also keeping some really great candidates from coming forward. And in your case, I think, speaking to that report, you have an eclectic mix of rural and suburban. So I think it won't happen here, but in other districts it has. So those are the bias things I wanted to point out. Just remember that we all, by virtue of growing up and watching TV and listening to our parents, we all have bias about people who are different than us. It's just normal. And just be careful during the process that you check that at the door to make sure you're as unbiased as you can around all of the people you're going to be talking to. Don't make positive assumptions. Don't make negative assumptions. It's just who we are. Other questions on that? Okay. And then the next thing we want to talk about are deliberation scenarios. And we've added these just because we've had some really tense deliberations the last 2 years on boards about who to hire. And it can be easy if you have one standout candidate and 4 or 5 good candidates. Because if there is someone who for some reason is head and shoulders above everyone else with what you're looking for, it's an easy decision. When this gets tricky is when you have multiple good candidates, because you all may feel differently about them. Even though they're all good, you might still want, Tim or Terry or Sue, because they're all so strong. So we put together some deliberation scenarios, and we're not going to go through them in detail, but I wanted to show, these are true scenarios. We had every single one of these things happen last year. So we decided to use them as a training opportunity. Let's say that you're down to a final 2 or final 3, and you are absolutely deadlocked. You have a 3-3-1 split. 3 of you want one person, 3 of you want the other, and one person refuses to decide because they're both so good. True story. As they keep talking, both sides dig in their heels more and more. And they're making assumptions about them because one candidate is young and vital and will be visible and have lots of energy and bring their kids here probably, and then we'll get more revenue because they have 6 kids. They told us they had 6 kids. So all these things about that candidate are in here. What do you think you would do if that were the case here? And this one is based mostly on assumptions. If you hear one another, because I would really hope that you as a board will self-correct yourselves and just work together. We'll be here in person for your interviews, and if things get sticky or kind of ugly, we will step in. And the chair at any time can say, MSBA, what do you think? Or MSBA, do you have any suggestions if you feel deadlocked? But what would you do if assumptions are driving your selection? How would you speak to one another about that?
I'm holding up the stakeholder report and asking to go back to what we said is important and the community said is important. I'm sorry, I should have granted space to other people. I like to be right, though. Director Zuzik.
Yes, and.
Okay.
I like that, the strategy of talking about the talents or the positive attributes of individual candidates. Just to, if there was something that I saw that maybe others didn't perceive, I would want to check that and see if, well, am I the only one here that heard that?
Other thoughts around the table about how to work yourself, how you would suggest working the board out of this situation?
I guess in general, I'm a very fact-based person, and just trying to get the conversation to move away from emotion and feeling and back into facts. And again, like referencing the stakeholder survey.
Those are all excellent ideas. Thank you for that. And again, just beware of your own assumptions. And you wouldn't want to accuse someone of, that's an assumption. You know, you don't want to do that. Just don't point your fingers or anything. But basing on facts is a really great idea, and getting away from emotions to facts. And going back to that stakeholder report, don't make your decision early on too much also. We have seen board members fall in love with the written application, because it just sounds so good on paper, and oh my gosh, their experience, and wow, their letters of reference. And you make up your mind that that's the person. And right away from day one, that's who you want to hire. Keep your mind open. Sometimes we may not recommend someone who is fabulous on paper. And that's because we've done some homework and uncovered some things that says they don't align with what you're looking for. And sometimes people interview very, very differently than they are on paper. Sometimes they don't write their own cover letter. They have someone proof it and edit it. So don't base everything on that and decide too quickly. And similarly with your interviews, you might have contrasting styles of interviews. Some people are extroverts, some are introverts. Some people are great interviewers and they don't have as much substance as someone who's more quiet, but their answers are deeper and more substantive. So when we come back the next time, we'll talk about evaluating the quality of the answer, because we do have a metric we want you to use for each question, so that they exceeded my expectation, they met it, or they didn't meet it, meaning they knocked it out of the park, it was average, or it just wasn't a very good answer for every single question, for every single candidate. So you're going to be tired, but that's great. Thank you for that. The next scenario is the debate actually starts to become heated, starts to unravel. Comments start to become personal from board member to board member. How do you respond in order to keep this collaborative and professional? This has only happened once.
Point of order. No, really, it's just taking, really looking to the chair to say, okay, maybe we need to take 5 minutes to regroup. focus on what we are actually here for, and move on with business.
Taking a recess is a great idea. Anyone can suggest it, the chair can call it, and then you can agree or not agree to take a recess. Some people just need a break to take, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, go for a quick walk. That's a good idea. Also, we always say try not to make it personal. This is about a very big decision from a very big perspective. And based on what your stakeholders said and your number one criteria as a student-centered leader, bring it back to the kids. Is this helpful for the kids in our district for us to be discussing this and becoming personal over this decision that's so important? So your role models, you all know your role models. So going back to that. Number 3 is during deliberation, one board member says they have information from credible sources that one candidate has issues that the rest of the board does not know about, and that is why they will not support that candidacy. How could your board manage this discussion?
It's hearsay. So unless there is something that I would assume with the background checks, with all the applicants, that that information would come up. However, if a board member were to identify an issue through a quote unquote credible source, I would hope that would be brought up to either you or your staff or the chair, so that all of us have equal information and understand maybe the gravity of whatever this information is.
Well said, because we will check into rumors, gossip, second, third, fourth hand information. Don't state it in a public meeting on the record if it's not a fact, to Director Tate's point.
So I have no idea how to answer this question, but I would be interested in what guidance you would give to us. So if a board member hears second or third hand, like, so the names have become public, and then somebody shows up and says, oh, I have got to tell you, man, my sister used to work over with so-and-so in that place, and this thing happened. Procedurally, what do we do with that?
I would ask you to just call me, and chances are I already know about it, and it is not factual. And if I don't know about it, we will look into it for you. And one thing I think that you are all very aware is anyone in a leadership position in education is going to have people who do not like them, right? They've made decisions that affect people, that affect people's lives, affect children, but it's a tough position to be in, to be a leader in education. So if that's what you're hearing is someone doesn't like someone because someone did something one time 5 years ago, you could still let me know, but chances are I'll dismiss it as just the cost of being a leader. That will happen. If there's a pattern, if enough people are saying those things, yes. We also do a social media sweep. We don't do the background check until the end, either on your last 6 or 3 or 1 finalist if you want it, and that was to be determined after the last meeting. But we do a quick social media sweep, and we look for red flags. And I'll tell you one short story that there was one candidate that the social media articles written by them in their local paper was not good. Not good. We felt this person was a viable candidate, so we investigated it more deeply. Called the board chair during that time because this person had had their contract non-renewed by a majority vote of the board. Might have been unanimous, I don't remember, but it didn't look good, right? So anyone that Googles, because people will Google, would have thought, oh my goodness, that person is awful, terrible, not trustworthy. The board didn't bring him back. The article was also not factual. It was slanted. So we talked to enough people about it, and it turns out that this person is the only person who had the courage to address some finances the district was facing. Previous superintendents had been kicking the can down the road on closing a school in a neighboring district. And so they kept it open and kept it open and kept it open, and we're losing money every year, and they were approaching statutory operating debt. So this superintendent said, enough is enough. We need to take a stand, or this district is going to become insolvent. So did focus groups, heard from people, please don't close our school, heard from the auditors, heard from lots of people, and recommended to the board that the school be closed the next year. And the board supported the decision. They closed the school. They recovered financially a little bit. It took them a couple of years to recover, but they closed the school. So that fall, when the election rolled around, guess who ran for school board? All the people whose kids went to school in that building, and many of them got elected, and they got elected on the platform to get rid of the superintendent. So they lost their job because they did the right thing for the district in the long term. So there was another side to that story, and so we always tell people, please don't believe everything you read, because there is more to the story. Don't believe what you read on social media, because there's definitely more to the story. And again, these people have been in positions to make tough decisions, and people are upset with them, of course, for some reason. So the vetting process we use, we'll go over more of it at a later point, gets to the heart, we feel in general, of who are these people. Nobody's perfect. We had a candidate once that was really, really good, and the board didn't want to interview her because 60 years ago, someone on the board discovered she had liked a particular post on Facebook that was a political post. And they felt that meant they could not remain neutral, because 6 years ago they liked a post that was for one or the other party. And so they refused to interview her. 6 years ago on Twitter or Facebook, I don't remember. That was unfortunate. She would have been phenomenal. It just didn't align with that board's vision. They wanted someone who had never, ever liked anything that was political on any of the social media platforms. I could understand it. They made that choice not to. So try to keep an open mind, trust our process, and yet trust your own, because you'll know who these people are. You could Google them yourselves. I don't want you to spend a lot of time doing it, because you get down rabbit holes and it takes forever. Versus we have a team of people that are talking to them and talking to references and doing fact checking, and who know a lot of people too. So just when deliberations are coming about, keep in mind there's always two sides to every story.
I have a question, and I'm not sure who to direct it to, but,
Go ahead.
so are we accepting applications from applicants who have been bought out of previous contracts?
That's a good question. Thank you. Anyone can apply for the job. So will you accept applications? Yes. Anyone could apply. People could apply who don't have superintendent licenses. Clearly, they're not qualified to serve as a superintendent, but they're welcome to apply. And so anyone can apply. You don't have to consider them, however. Now, whether or not they've been, did you say bought out of a previous contract? Whether or not they have been may or may not be a reason to not interview them. And if they have been bought out of a contract, in the application process, it says, have you ever been non-renewed? Or maybe the language isn't exactly that, but it says yes or no. If yes, please explain. And if there's a yes, please explain, we will dig into the reasons why. And there may have been a very valid reason for that. Again, we won't be able to talk about it in the open meeting, because then people will know who we're talking about. But if they've said yes, now if they say, no, I never have, and then we find out that they have been bought out but refuse to answer truthfully on the application, then that goes to the bottom of the list, and we will say that person is not recommended for you. Now, we don't always know those things, because they can lie if they want to. 98% of the people are completely honest on their application, but similarly, their resumes, maybe they didn't actually get their PhD. Maybe it's everything but dissertation, but they claim they have the PhD. We can't possibly check all of those things, but we try to do the best job we can. Good question, thank you. So deliberations, we'll get there, we'll talk more about it, but we do really like you to keep things positive. They're watching your body language during the interview as well, and during deliberations, because we'll talk a little bit later about whether you're live streaming interviews and deliberations, but people will be here watching you. So again, be open, be receptive. Don't frown or shake your head or cross your arms if you don't like an answer. You're the board, so remain above board, all of that stuff. Okay, that's it. The interview questions, I'm going to go past those, page 30 to 36, I think. We will be coming back to interview questions at the end of the night here, so we'll skip past those, but there's a lot of categories. The candidate's turn is in my packet. Is that in yours too? Okay. Thank you. The candidate's turn, this is where they are interviewing you. The last question that we will always suggest you ask is, what questions do you have for us? And we ask people to leave time at the end of their interview. They have 1 hour, and we're holding up signs at 30 minutes and 15 minutes left and 5 minutes left. They have a copy of the questions next to them, and so we're hoping they pace themselves so they don't run out of time. Because that very last question is a chance for them to get to know you. And we are seeing candidates ask more insightful, better questions than they have in years. It's really fun to see them ask you these things. And some of the questions possibly are here. These are a little bit more standard. You know, how do you evaluate the superintendent? What are the strengths? What are your goals? What are your challenges? Those are kind of boilerplate questions. Candidates now are coming in wanting to know about, oh gosh, there's been some good ones this year. I'm not going to say them because candidates might be watching this, and I don't want to give away some really great questions. The one thing I would say is when they ask you questions, Chair Hedin will field the question. And first of all, say, is there anyone who'd like to answer that? Please speak up. If it's dead silence when they ask a question because none of you want to go on the record with your answer, that tells them a lot. And so they want to hear from you, and they want to hear you build off of each other's ideas. So if, you know, Carrie Tate says something, then I would hope that Mark Zuzek will build on it. And then I would hope that Brian Davis would say, well, in addition to that, I really like this. And so if they see you building on each other's ideas and offering different answers, please don't feel like you have to have a company line. We want you to be yourselves and answer the question so they know who they'd be working for. But the worst thing that can happen is the chair ends up being the only one willing to answer the questions. And after 2 or 3 questions, and Chair Hedin is the only one who's saying anything, they're going to say, okay, well, I think I'm done. Thank you. So please contribute to the conversation. That makes a great impression on candidates. Okay? And then reference checks. We will have done our reference checking, but we only call references that they list on the application because, again, their name is private data. And if we call someone that we know probably knows them, that's automatically outing that person that they're in the pool. So we don't call anybody unless they're listed as a reference on that application or they've written a letter of reference. Between round 1 and round 2, and you have some time between those dates, the 16th and the 23rd, we like someone or 2 someones on the board to make some reference check calls. And here are some possibilities. And the reason we do that is, 1, we want you to have done some due diligence on behalf of the board. The other reason is it's always surprising what people will tell a school board member that they won't tell the search firm, you know? And you can go off the road. You can go four-wheeling with your reference checks. I've had board members say, I don't know who I'm calling yet, but I know I'm going to call someone that they've worked for, someone that has worked for them, and someone they've worked with. And then they kind of put on their detective hat and they go in and look at where they've worked, and then they call a couple of people that fit that description. And you don't have to do that. Someone else said, I'm going to call the mayor of each of the towns that they've worked in, or something like that. So there should be some consistency to who you're calling, so you're not just randomly calling people. You want to have some apples to apples, you know, former board chairs for each of the 3 finalists or something. So give some thought to who might be willing to do that between the 16th and the 23rd, and then I'll work with you directly about making those calls. You don't have to do a lot, and you certainly don't have to ask all these questions. I have another list where, as a board, you'll say, I have like 12 questions I'll give all of you, and you can all decide, I like question 3, 6, and 12. And then that's the questions you ask, and you ask them of all the references so that it's the same for each candidate. Is there anyone who knows right now that they would really like to be someone doing that? You don't have to decide tonight, but I do want someone doing some work. Jessica? Carrie? Mark? Possibly 3 of you? Okay, so keep thinking about it, and then when it gets closer, we'll talk about maybe who you're all calling. So you don't want to all call the same people because they'll get tired of talking to you. Divvy up a list and divvy up the questions, and then I also want to work with you on how you give that report. Because you'll be giving a report after the round 2 interviews of what you learned about the candidates in between. And typically it's confirming what you already know. If you do run across something concerning, because again, you're a board member, they're going to tell you things they might not tell us, call me and we'll do a little more digging to make sure that it's valid, and then how you might raise that concern in the deliberations. You don't want to, again, say anything that's a rumor in the deliberations on the record. So I'll work with the 3 of you on that. Thank you. All right, lastly, deliberating in public. On the very bottom is the best way to put it, the do's and the don'ts. Please do focus on the positive attributes. Please do use your hiring criteria and stakeholder report to evaluate these candidates and treat them the way you would like to be treated. It's in a public setting. It's a high stakes position. It's very public. People are watching and listening. People will be nervous. So give them some grace and accept that sometimes people don't interview well, and yet they might still be a rock star superintendent. So maybe you still want to bring them back. If they're nervous and they're sweating, you don't need to point that out during deliberations. If they have a verbal tic where they keep saying something like, if they keep saying it, you don't need to point it out in deliberations. It's pretty obvious when people have habits that don't come across very well in a public interview. Don't point those things out. And there'll be some people you say more positive things about because they're your leading candidates, and that's okay. But for us, when we call candidates who are not selected, it really helps. I take notes when you're saying, each board member say one or two things about the strengths, and you're saying things that are really great. So when I call with the bad news that they're not being brought back for another interview, I have feedback to say they really said these things about you, and it is true. So I like to jot those things down. The only time, and I'll have a script for you when we meet next time, there's an outline of how the deliberations will grow, because you're going to run the deliberations yourselves. We're on the side. We're not running this for you. So Chair Hardeen, you're going to want to follow the script and be comfortable with this happens and then this and then this. The only time where we have people perhaps sharing the deficits of candidates is if you have that maybe two really strong people and they have really strong skill sets. If you can't move off the middle on that, you might say, well, did we notice any deficits in either of them that will help us make the decision? Now, your stakeholders talked about finance and budget being important. So perhaps you could say, I feel like Sue is much stronger in finance than Bill was. I seem like she had more experience in the financial arena and he hasn't had the opportunity yet. So you're pointing to perhaps a weakness for Bill, but you're not criticizing him for it. But that observation about deficits might move you into a consensus around the other candidate. So if you have to go to deficits, you can. And we'll talk through how to do that when we get you the script. Any questions on that? That is the end of the training, because now the next page is the superintendent contract, model contract. And that's probably not, oh, it is in the packet. No, it's not. Okay. There you go. Okay, so that is our interview training. I know it was a lot. I want to thank you for your attention, because I feel like I talk and talk and talk and talk. Any questions about what's going to happen, when and why and how? Good. All right. Does anyone need a break? We only have a little bit left to do, but if you need a break, I'm happy to pause for a moment. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is pass around a tentative schedule. This is for round one on Tuesday, May 16th. This is what I had referenced earlier, that it'll depend how many people you choose to interview.
Very grateful for the 9:55 start.
So the gist of this is you will call the meeting to order 5 minutes before you start the interviews. So we can start the interviews at the top of the hour. I picked 10 o'clock because I wanted to show you what it would look like if you interviewed 6 people. And that's probably the most I would suggest. It might be fewer than that. Again, we've had 3 or 4 people in round one sometimes too. So we would take a break. These are 1-hour interviews with a 15-minute break between. Then we're suggesting a half-hour break for lunch with some snacks and some sandwiches, possibly 3 more, and then you take a break. So if you interview 6 and if you start at 10 o'clock, at 6 o'clock you'll start your deliberations about who to bring back for round 2. Sometimes that doesn't take very long. Sometimes there are 2 or 3 people that really rose to the top and it goes really quickly. Sometimes it takes a long time if you've got a very strong pool or a pool that's not strong enough for your tastes. I mean, you can decide what to do. You're the board. And then you also, after that, will decide on those round 2 questions and the round 2 schedules, and we'll talk a little bit more to the folks who agreed to do reference checking. So there's still some work to be done after deliberations, but it typically doesn't take very long. So I had two questions. First of all, where will these be held? Because these, again, are open to the public, and I want to fill in the bottom correctly. All interviews will be held.
Well, a couple things to point out, and I think the first question is different than where will they be held. This is a school day. The May 16th is a school day. And school will be in session. This is the media center for our middle school. It's been pointed out a couple of times, and even tonight, about not wanting to give away a question because candidates could be previewing other interviews. So the first question, I think, is, will this be a streamed event? We need to answer that question, and I think the answer to that question leads us to the opportunities for where we would be to host it. So I'd be interested in hearing some thoughts about that. Director Mull.
I don't think it should be live streamed because, you know, candidate 6 is going to have the upper hand compared to candidate 1. Oh, yeah, I totally forgot that it's on a school day too.
Well, wait, pardon.
Yeah, let's leave the where discussion aside. I will point out another concern that I have about, I do not support it being live streamed. Because to the point that you raised, it's inequitable. I also initially am not that interested in it being taped. I have a lot of concerns about, and this is feedback from our previous selection, where interviews were done on Zoom, and I think there were Zoom recordings, and they existed for a while in a public space where people could get them, and candidates were interviewing for other jobs. And their interviews were still available. And so when you say people, you know, people are people, and American people Google stuff, right? And think, you know, somebody might have a poor interview or might have a tech challenge, and then it shows up. So we've learned that lesson. And that aside, let's imagine they're not in a public space. My other concern is about data request. Like, once we collect the data of an interview, a taped interview, we have a level of responsibility around managing that. And I just don't see what that would do for us, but those are my first two takes when I think about this. So I don't feel a need to be someplace where we can stream or tape. I'd be curious to hear what other people are thinking.
Off of that, so these are open to the public. We've had meetings where public is unruly. What happens then?
I have never seen that happen in a superintendent interview yet. It's not to say it can't happen. If someone, for instance, in the audience decides to shout a question out that they want the superintendent to answer, the candidate to answer, I'll be the one who says, don't answer that. This is a meeting of the school board in the public. It's not a public meeting. And so I could be the one to deal with that if it were to happen. It hasn't happened yet, and I wouldn't expect it would. People are respectful of the process, and yet never say never. So if it does, I'd be the one that would stand up and say, don't answer it, and please refrain from doing that. And if they do it a second time, I'd ask them to leave, just to ensure that it's fair to everybody.
I concur. I don't think it should be recorded, and I absolutely should not be live streamed.
I agree that it shouldn't be live streamed, but I feel it should be recorded, just for a feel of complete transparency with the community, because this is such an important decision. I feel like they should be privy to seeing what steps the board has gone through to vet all of the candidates and hear the board's discussion in how we got to that final decision.
Director Dressley, then Director Mull.
I don't even know how to manage this. Like, how long would we leave that available, or how long would we leave that up for the community to access that? Those would be my questions about that, just because, like you said, you don't want to leave it up there forever, because then they don't get the position, other districts might be interviewing them, and then they can go back and find that. So I would be okay with that, but I'd want there to be a time frame. Then I don't know how many views we'd get with that.
Well, and to that point too, it's still, even if we say, okay, it's going to be available for 3 days afterwards, it's still subject to data requests. I'm thinking I guess my personal opinion, I'm impartial one way or the other. I'm thinking maybe audio only. The thing is with it being in the public, it does not prevent somebody in the public from streaming it. And we know that's going to happen because it happens at every meeting. And we can't ask them to not do that and not to publish it on social media. So I think if we, maybe at minimum, it's audio recording, and then we have it available, putting a time frame on that, because and maybe I'm making this up in my head. I thought we did get a request from a candidate, or maybe it was just a complaint that, hey, can you please take that down?
Yeah, and so when we began this process, when I became aware that we were going to be in this election, I did contact the previous chair and ask about lessons learned through the selection, and that was one of the things that a Zoom recording had been left up and a candidate had asked that it be taken down. I just I am completely fine with all of the deliberations being streamed. That I have no reservations about that and about that conversation, and I acknowledge that those, and I'm completely open to that. I would just not want the candidate interviews recorded. It's data we don't need to keep and we don't need to manage. And in the event that a citizen in the audience chooses to tape it, it would be very evident that that's not district material and that's not endorsed material. And we can't do anything about that. But if we leave an interview up for a day and then it gets saved or screencast, it's us enabling a misuse of data. And it's open to the public. The public is welcome to come to the interviews. And I am very open, and I think under virtually any schedule, by the time we get to deliberations, we could move into this space. I don't know. That's my thoughts. Director Beisel and then Director.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say it's open to the public for transparency. I agree, but it's open to the public. And do the candidates know that we'd be taping them? Are they aware of ahead of time? So that might skew some people, a good candidate too, if they don't want to be recorded and the data out there. Especially if somebody asked us to take it down at one point.
They do ask. I haven't had anyone withdraw from an interview because it's being live streamed or recorded. I have had candidates be much more careful what they say if it's being recorded or live streamed. And that is sometimes unfortunate for you because you want to really get to know these people and they'll watch themselves more carefully. And this is something that is actually new since the pandemic, because in the olden days, everything was done in an open meeting and doors were open and people came in and watched you do your business, including the interviews. Then people got accustomed to live streaming because of the meetings by electronic means during the pandemic. They got used to it and started to expect it and started to think it was required by law. It's not. As long as the doors are open and people can come watch you do your business, it's a courtesy to record or live stream, but you don't have to do it. It's just that people will read into the decision. So if, for instance, you choose not to live stream the interviews, I would assume or hope that you would put some sort of information, interviews not being live streamed to ensure a level playing field for all candidates, or something so people understand you're not hiding anything. You just want the best candidate, not the best prepared candidate. Now, that doesn't mean that a candidate can't come in and sit in the back of the room during the first two interviews and then they walk in as the fourth interview and it's like, You look familiar. That has happened. I have had an internal candidate come and watch the first couple interviews and then show up for their interview, and they did really well. Did not move on to the second round, though, because it was a bad look. The board didn't like it that they came in and did that. They had every right to be there, though. So you never know. You never know. Your decision. I think all the conversation about the interviews from a candidate's perspective is very fair. They prefer they not be recorded and live streamed. You have the right to do it, but they prefer it. I think the idea of live streaming your deliberations is a good one so that people could see how the board is discussing and making your decisions, and that's transparent. And or moving into this room from a different room. I can make this look any way you want it to as far as schedule and location.
Director Dressley.
Well, just to speak of, if we were to do it somewhere else in this building, it'd be a little bit more limited for the amount of people that would be able to attend, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it would be. So the place that we've used in the past, and this was I don't know if I think we used this for the interim selection that we met in the district office, conference room A, which is the bigger conference room. And I don't know if it was because it was interim. I don't know if it was because of work. We did not have anybody in attendance. They would have been welcome to come, and there's space because you just sit around the outside of the room. And we've been all over the board. We've had meetings like today where nobody is in person. We've had meetings that I think are more topic driven, where we've had really high attendance. The logistical advantages that I've seen to the district conference room, and this does not speak to superintendent interviews, but in the distant past, I participated in some administrator interviews. They had community representatives. Is you have the entryway that has close access to restrooms and a water cooler, and you have a place where incoming candidates can sit comfortably and be greeted. And the room is, there's accessible parking on that side of the building and that kind of thing. So I have a bias where I've seen that be successful. It's just hard to imagine how many people would choose to come. I would definitely want to, the more I think about it and hear the conversation, I would definitely want to move to this space and assure that deliberations are happening after school is done, whatever the timing looks like. So even if it's 3 people, we would not begin deliberations until 3:30 or 4 o'clock, whenever this space could be made available to us for the deliberations. But that district office conference room has proven to be pretty successful for that. I see Ms. Garcia would like to give some input.
I just wanted to point out as well that the district office conference room A is a much, much different space now than it was when you did the interim, because we got rid of that huge table. So we literally could have it set up just the way you have it now, exactly like this in that room for the candidates, and then you'd have more space for individuals who would like to attend in person. And then you have the small conference room adjacent to that where we can set up your goodies.
So now I'm super motivated because there's going to be snacks adjacent to district room A. No, but I thank you, Ms. Garcia, for pointing that out. We used to have a substantial conference table in that room, and we don't anymore, which gives us a lot of flexibility about setup. So, more thoughts, Director Malm?
So when we're doing the interviews, it's procedural, I would think this question is, are we in session? We're going to say, okay, we're calling this meeting to order. Okay. Oh yeah, it says right here, sorry. So if in the event that, let's say we start off in the district office and we are finding that the space is not a good space for the amount of individuals that decide to come in, can we then move it in here. I know we have done that in the past where we had to move it from the DO to in here, and I cannot remember how we did it. I know we got legal involved though, and they said, yep, and this is how it's done.
Good, Ms. Garcia.
Director Garcia. No. Just Ms. Garcia is fine. So you're talking about a closed session. You moved from a closed session into an open meeting.
Is that what it was?
Yes, and it was a posting, and we dealt with that. The issue is, when you're talking about, if you can't really make a split-second decision to move because of open, correct me if I'm wrong, Barb, because of open meeting law, because this is where it's been posted. The other issue is that coming down here in the middle of the day, you have an open meeting and the public can't just come in here during the school day.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know what the curriculum building looks like currently. It's been a long time since I've been in there, but I don't know if that would be an option because that would leave more space for people to come.
Ms. Garcia?
I can speak to that as well.
I'm glad you're here tonight.
It is a big, giant open room. So yes, a lot more people could join there. HCTV, assuming that you had your deliberations there, because it would be much more difficult to come down here after you're done with your interviews. So I would assume you just wanted to do it there. HCTV would have a lot more space there. I don't know how audio would be over there, but with that said, it is one big open space. There is not a place for the next interviewee to come and like holding pattern and be inside, and for interviewees to not like run into each other and things like that. Whereas again, at the district office, we now have that little waiting room where we can kindly put them and close the door. So that way they are just kind of hanging out.
Madam Chair, I wonder if we could request some assistance from the staff at Kennedy to be the place where a candidate would show up for the interview and then walk that 150 feet to the curriculum center.
I hate to bring this up, but it's Minnesota. Who the heck knows what's going to happen that day? You could have a snow squall and you'd be trying to walk them, and I'm not kidding, you're trying to walk them across from even the 200. It's just that type of, I just don't feel it's the greatest welcome to these candidates to set them up in a situation that could be untenable like that. I'd prefer that we take our chances with the, what, Ms. Garcia, 20 people, 25 that we could seat in there? With the way it's set up now, with the way we can configure it, maybe get 22 dozen in there maybe, or more?
I would have to check on that and I can get back to you, but we can certainly try and accommodate as many people as can comfortably fit in there. I don't personally see it as being an issue, but because the deliberations, exactly to Director Tate's point, are what people are really going to want to see. Is the board doing their work?
I would agree, and I'd like to just add to that it is the middle of a workday. It's not like everybody can just up and go. It is the middle of a workday, so that's going to mitigate the number of people as well, in my opinion.
One more thing in our experience is staff obviously are very invested in what's happening, but it's also during their contract hours, the interviews. Your deliberations, if they're after contract hours, you'll have quite a few people showing up who are staff and teachers of the district. So they may miss the interviews, but they want to hear what you decide and discuss. And so that really is after their hours that they can come, and they can't come earlier. So.
I just thought of one other thing when we're talking about people coming to the interviews in person. people are not going to be staying there the whole time. This is a long, long day, and people are not going to sit there for that long. So even if you have room for 10 people, you're going to have people cycling in and out. So just something to think about.
So I'm trying to reflect on the conversation and see if I've heard. So shockingly enough, we don't have a perfect answer as yet identified, but I'm trying to see if we have a way going forward, because we are on a time frame and we do have to make a decision. When do we set the start time? Now I'm just I'm just treading water here.
On May 10th, the 7 o'clock meeting, we'll present our finalists, and then you'll decide who you want to interview, and that'll determine how many. And then we can fill in the blanks on the sheet here.
Okay. All right, thank you. Because to the point that that Ms. Storn made, that our staff, after their contract hours, are likely to attend or want to hear that deliberation, and that this space is not available till really the end of the school day, and we've given students some amount of time to clear out and assure a safe access for the public, more of the public. I would want to, lead towards Ms. Garcia.
I apologize. I did not mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware of breaking news that I just received from HCTV. They do have the ability as well, should we need the overflow, we could assess another area for the public to come and sit, and they can set up a TV and just stream to that room as overflow if we needed it. You could even have and I'd have to talk with them further, but I think we could have the curriculum center even be overflow from the district office where it's being interviewed. Then you could still be fed in the district office and be fed down here later.
This is all right. Good. I appreciate you bringing us focused back. Students, snacks. Keeping us on that. Okay, well, that's good to hear. So that might give us some flexibility if we needed to do that. I guess what I'm hearing is that a majority of board members are comfortable not taping or live streaming or recording the candidate interviews. I hear an absolute consensus that deliberations be live streamed and in a space with more larger accessibility to the public. And so, if I am incorrectly summarizing the conversation around the table, and I know it's not completely unanimous, that we would hold the candidate interviews in the district office conference room A. We'd identify a start time based on the number of candidates. Clearly 9:55 is the earliest that we would begin under any circumstance. And then that the deliberations, so in the course of one meeting, we could set it up that that a deliberations takes place in a different location. It's accessible. The nice thing here is that people don't have to move their cars. They're not driving from one building to another building. It would be moving down the hallway. And then we move deliberations here, and Ms. Garcia will pursue information on how HCTV would be available to assist in the event that we needed overflow broadcasting. Ms. Dressley.
TV, not live streaming.
Closed circuit TV for that.
That is correct. It would not be recorded. It would not be live streamed. It would go directly to XTV in designated locations. So whether that's the small conference room right next to the large conference room, wherever that may be, we would designate that and they would set that up.
All right, thank you. I see Ms. Dressley. Is that Director Dressley? Sorry. I'm losing track of what title I'm supposed to use with which person. Is that an acceptable summary? Director Dressley. Did you? Go ahead, sorry.
My question is, so I'm wondering if we have to publish the time that we're going to have the open deliberation, like, do we have to establish that for open meeting law then? I just want to make sure.
Ms. Dorn?
We'd basically publish this exactly, and it does have the little asterisks by it that say times the below order is subject to change. And so sometimes a candidate's interview runs real short. They only take 45 minutes with you. If the next candidate is here and you want to start early, you can start early. So you're not bound to these specific times, but you would say in the posting that the interviews will take place here, and then we'd have another deliberations will take place here. And as long as it's posted with those two locations, you're good. Thank you. And so one thing I want you to think about, you don't have to decide tonight, is in looking ahead to round 2 on May 23rd, 4th, 3rd, May 23rd, whether or not you would like to offer district tours to the candidates. You most likely would be starting interviews at 4 o'clock. So you'd have, if you have 3 people, you do a 4 o'clock, a 5:15, and a 6:30. A break at 7:30, deliberation starting at 8, because we need about a half hour to get all your results from your matrix inputted. You could offer tours earlier in the day to candidates, and they could tour the buildings, and then your building administrators would walk them through their schools and answer questions. You could also have them tour the community with a community host. We've had a couple of districts have students lead the tours, and that's really been a hit with some candidates. 2 students per candidate, so maybe 6 students on that round 2, with a district bus driver and a district van for each of the candidates, and then the students have followed them or taken them around to the buildings and then met with the principal, and then the principal leads the tour and the students hang around. That's been a new twist I thought worked really well in a few districts. Otherwise, a community member could be a great host, drive them around in their own car, show them the town. It's an opportunity to really show off the community and show off the district buildings. It's not required, and it usually takes about 2 or 3 hours. So a candidate would come at 1 o'clock and interview at 4, and then they'd come at 2:15 and interview at 5:15, things like that. So initial thoughts that you may or may not want to do that, you don't have to decide today, but.
Have candidates found, or have you received any feedback from candidates? Do they find that to be a value add?
Yes. They really get a flavor for what the building, not just the buildings are like, but if they can tour during the day when students are there. They love walking through the buildings when the kids are passing in the hall and high-fiving their teachers and stuff like that. They really enjoy that. And it does give your administrators a chance to meet each of the candidates. They're not interviewing these people on your behalf. It's just, as administrators, this would be the person responsible for them, so they sometimes appreciate the chance to informally get to know them, see what kind of questions they ask. And a couple of candidates have commented how much more comfortable the interview was because they'd seen the buildings and they felt more informed to comment on some of these things. And internal candidates take the tours as well, which has been interesting if there is one, but we've had internal candidates, you treat them exactly the same as an external candidate. They take the same tours. Someone in their own building, obviously they're not given the tour if they're a principal, someone else would, but they've done that just to ensure that they follow the same process as everyone else. And it turned out they loved it. They thought it would be redundant, but they loved the chance to tour the other buildings. So it's your search though. You set up what is really going to be best for Hastings.
Thank you for, Thank you for that. That kind of was what I was hoping for. And I love the idea of having 2 students to be able to go along with that tour. I think that's just a neat thing to maybe that we can consider.
I think it'd be a great idea because then it gives that candidate a look at the staff, the teachers, the administration, and it also gives them a chance to see the superintendent or the potential superintendent in that. And I just think it would be a good way for the collaborative environment to start.
Any other thoughts, Director Tate?
I agree. I think it should at least be offered. And I mean, they may not want to do it or have the time to do it or whatever, but I think it should at least be offered to the final candidates.
I see general head nodding around the table.
I just like the idea of the students doing it. I think it's kind of a fun, different way than just a community member who has a bias or, I don't know. I think it's fun that the students get involved and then they see it that way. I like that idea a lot.
The only concern I would have with only students being there is that they wouldn't be able to answer any questions should they have, specific ones about the building or whatever. But yeah, so students going along with the principal.
Yeah,
the
students
yeah.
doing it, but the principals like that. So that the principals would be in the buildings answering the questions, but the students are kind of the ones guiding and being in the car with the district office or district employee.
Yeah, because for the bands that our district owns, we have, district employees that are band trained. So it wouldn't necessarily be a Hastings Bus Company employee. It would be a district employee with a couple of students. Okay. I hear general interest in pursuing something, but Director Mom?
This is great because it gives us a little bit more lead time to start thinking about it. So I'll talk to Becky and we can kind of look at tentative schedules and start brainstorming some ways that this would work and how students would be invited to participate in the tour, because you may need 4, you may need 6, and who gets to choose, and are their parents okay with them missing class time to help with those sort of considerations. Becky and I will talk through if that's okay with all of you. Okay. Great, thank you. That is it. All we have left is questions. So I'm going to hand these out, and this is something that after you have looked these over, I'm going to collect them and bring them back, because the last thing we want is for anyone to see these in advance. We want everyone, again, treated the same. So 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So at this point, nobody screenshot them.
Please do not do that.
And do not read them out loud.
Yeah, I do want that one. Thank you, Mark.
Okay?
I know how to use it, but I have to.
Oh, good heavens. So don't read these questions out loud, just so you're ready. We'll talk about them in a way that keeps them private. Director Zuzak.
As these are circulating around, I want to amend my nonfiction recommendation. And I strongly recommend, this is my best read of the year, the book Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. It is a beautiful book, a beautiful book.
So for reference, I did ask for suggestions of nonfiction books that my book group could consider. So I'm adding it to my Goodreads list right now. Okay. All right.
I rescinded that one, didn't I?
So after that little walk in the woods, we're now going to bring ourselves back. Everybody take a deep breath. Everybody take a drink of their beverage. Sit up straight, stretch a little bit, and let's go for questions.
I'll share my instructions and give you maybe 5 minutes on this. So I have 2 lists of questions. The first list, you'll see there's an opening question and a closing question that are pretty standard. So you already have 2 questions, question 1 and question 29. I'm going to assume you're going to ask both of those, okay? Then what I would like you to do individually is go through and pick one question under each hiring criteria. One question, okay? So by the time we're done with that, and Chair Hedin will facilitate a conversation, we'll have 10 questions. Please only use the numbers. We don't want to wordsmith these out loud, because people who are watching this, including candidates, would then know what the questions are. So pick one under each of these and we'll have 10. Then I'm going to give you a list of questions to do the same thing with based on the stakeholder report, okay?
Are we allowed to write on this?
Yes, I am still going to collect it back from you, however. If you want to wordsmith it yourself and rephrase things, you can make notes of that, and I'll collect those and incorporate them, and we can do that as well. But yeah, you can write on them.
That's fine. Director Mom just made it clear that that's already happened, so.
Oh, she already wrote on hers. Yes, well, you have to circle the numbers so we can take a vote to see who likes which questions.
I'm going to reward fast readers and fast selectors with the opportunity for a bio break in the event that you need to.
I thought you were going to say cookies.
No, no cookies. All right, let's buckle down.
Missed the dig.
She's moving on. She's moving on. Let's work our way through the questions. I do have one component of that last question up there that we're going to get to, but the end is in sight. So our opening question is the opening question. I can say the categories, right?
Yes, and then I would just say how many prefer question 2, how many prefer question 3. And I'm just going to take notes.
Okay.
And then we'll circle back and I'll let you know which ones I think it sounded like you chose. So it's just a matter of getting the tallies first.
Okay, so we'll go all the way through all
All
of
the
the
way through.
questions and get the
Yep.
tallies. Okay.
What if we combine questions?
That's when you need to make notes and provide comments
Okay.
back
Got it.
to Barb. But we're not going to wordsmith, and we're not going to wordsmith out loud. So it would be on the notes that you hand back in.
Great.
To a
If though you want to
degree.
combine something, you could say, I really want to combine 13 and 14. How does everybody feel about that? To make sure the whole board is okay with the combining of some questions. And then I could work on it, but I just want to make sure that everyone agrees if it's a combination.
Okay, good point. Director Tate?
I was just going to make one comment. I've interviewed a lot of people, and I guess one thing that I find very helpful for me personally, before we go through any of this, is getting input on their actual experience. Just because you can make stuff up, right, in an interview. And I guess I've had plenty of people who are really good interviews and they know the right thing to say, but if you actually ask them about history, they stumble a little bit more because they have to come up with an actual example. Just my 2 cents.
And to that point, there are some times in here where we say, please be specific or give specific examples. However, if you wouldn't mind, Director Tate, if you have suggestions on wording some of these to be more like that and less what would you do kind of thing, would you please make note of those on there and I'll make those changes because I think you're absolutely right.
Okay, so for our first run through here, we're going to just use a tally system. Please put your hand up high enough that Ms. Dorn can see. There are no decisions to be made under opening question, under puts the needs of students first. Who prefers question 2? I don't know what to do with that flinch, Director Davis. Who prefers question 3?
I didn't listen that. You know what I mean.
Okay. Under the next category is visible and accessible to the school board staff, students, parents, and community. Who prefers question 4? Who prefers question 5? Who prefers question 6? And who prefers question 7? Okay, thank you. Under acts with honesty and in an ethical manner with all stakeholder groups across the district. In that category, who prefers question 8? Who prefers question 9? Who prefers question 10? Who prefers question 11? I could have done the math there, sorry, if I was tracking. Under provides a supportive learning environment for an increasingly diverse student body. Who prefers question 12?
I combined 12 and 14, meshed it together.
Okay, 12 alone. Right now we have 3. We'll just do 13 next. Did anybody prefer 13? 0, and then 14 must have been the other 3, and then can we circle back to that then? To kind of
Possibly combine 12 and 14 because this is
That's
pretty even.
everybody.
Yeah, I think we could do that. 12 and 14. Was it 12 and 14 or 12 and 13?
Correct.
Yes, 12 and 14. So I have it noted in here.
Yep.
Yep.
so maybe we'll circle back to that, but I do note that everybody selected either 12 or 14.
I'm just wondering, I think the last section we did, it was split between 2, was it, am I correct with that? So if there was a way.
Right now, I think all of them are split. So I think we're gonna get the tallies and we're gonna loop back through and discuss each category.
I just want to see if there's another opportunity to combine 2 questions if we were split for just 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think right now we're gathering the tally, if I understood our directions correctly, and then we'll circle back. And I think we'll see that in the tally count, the ones where it's predominantly maybe two different questions. Under the category of has the ability to collaboratively develop opportunities to overcome equity challenges, who prefers question 15? I'm gonna forget to vote. 16? 17? 18? Okay. Under the category. I was gonna say, Director Malm?
Correct. 16 and 18. Again, with it noted in here. And that's the last one I combined, I promise.
Please make a note in the record that Director Malm has promised not to combine any future questions. Just saying. Okay. I lost track. No, practices delegation of authority and empowers others through building mutual trust to sustain accountability. Under that category, who preferred question 19? Man. Question 20? I should know the answer to this. 21? I'm the only person that didn't go on 18. 19? Who preferred 22? Okay, nobody. Got it. Under demonstrates effective leadership through clear, direct communication and support. Excuse me, question 20, question 23. Question 24. Question 25. Question 26. Okay. And then under the category of works cooperatively with the school board and provides options and recommendations. Question number 27. Question number 28. Okay, thank you. And the closing question, we don't have anything.
So I'll just review these. There are some that are clear, some that we might combine, or some that you could also save for round two. Because there are people, when they read these, if it's close and everyone likes them, it's like, well, let's ask that in round two. Because I'll bring back more questions in round two, but if you really like some here, or if you've liked some, I know Director Dressley looked through you had mentioned looking through the questions in the training packet. If you had some in there you really liked, we could look at those now, or we could look at them for round two as well. So I have question 1, 3, 4, 8, and then 10 was very close. We had 4 for 8 and 3 for 10, so we could try to combine those, or we could put one of them in round 2 and one of them in round 1. What are your thoughts on that? Question 8 already is 4 questions sort of in there.
Following Director Tate's comment earlier, this is a real life example of something that's happened in the past that might follow that.
Yeah, so to see if I understand what you're saying there and to build off of what Director Tate said in the past, I see 8 being a specific historical example that could be fleshed out. I find question 10 a very interesting and forward-thinking question, and I would like to maybe see it considered again in question 2 or round 2. Speaking as a person who selected 10.
So I will include 8, and I'll make a note by 10 to put that in round 2. Okay, thank you.
At least considered it around 2.
Then we had 12 and 14 equal, and Dr. Malm suggested combining those. Would you be comfortable if we work to combine those into something? I would have Amy help me with that, or maybe you had a suggestion.
Well, I do, but I can't say it. I do have a question. So you're going to work this list. Do we receive the list before we say, yep, this is what we want to go forward with?
I could bring hard copies with me on May 10th. I may be able to come in person that night as well, and if so, I could bring the hard copies that night on the 10th, so you could have one more chance to prove them. I'd hesitate to have them out there electronically by sending them out electronically and having everyone we've had some instances this year where candidates have gotten them ahead of time, and it's been unfortunate. So I really try to keep hard copy and collect them. So I could do that on the 10th if I'm here, or I could have Becky make copies to distribute to you that night and then hand them back into her before you leave. That works too.
Director Dressley.
I will be attending that meeting virtually, so just wanted to make sure I made that statement now.
I put that in our board calendar, so we know that, which might lead into that a little bit. I do want to grant MSBA their professionalism. I don't want to be wordsmithing questions a ton, but if it's, I mean, I would trust that there's a place, you could find a place where 12 and 13 come together. Director Davis.
A couple of things, well, two things. I think that we should give, in terms of combining questions that we obviously looked at the wording on, give MSB a little latitude on that in the interest of trying to get it completed tonight, because of the fact that Director Dressley will have a tough time accessing the revised questions. I just think that's going to complicate making sure that all 7 of us have an equal opportunity to do that. That if we could trust MSBA to get that wording straight, get it resolved this evening, it doesn't put Director Dressley in an unfavorable position or on equal position.
Looking at 12 and 14, and again, building off of the point that Director Tate made previously, maybe there's a place in there for a reflective example and a future engagement component, and maybe that gets at the heart of those two questions. So just hearing around the room.
Okay, thank you. I made a couple of notes. So I will combine 12 and 14 into one question. And then I have 16 having the most. However, we have a suggestion to combine it with 18. Or we could do round one, round two. They're shorter, so we could combine them a little more easily, maybe.
It is not a hill I'm willing to die on, so I'm totally comfortable. Yes, totally comfortable with just moving forward with 16.
And then consider 18.
Keep it on the list, potentially, yeah. We can reconsider it.
Okay, so 16, 18, round two with a question mark behind it. Thank you. All right, 19. Same thing with 23 and 26. They are very similar.
Remind me, was that a more
23
even
and
split?
26. That was 3-3.
Okay.
So suggestions of how you'd like to proceed with that.
I think that 23 and 26 set themselves up perfectly for this idea of one of them being in the second round versus the first.
I was teeter-tottering on 23 and 26. I voted 26, so I see one in one round, one in the other. It doesn't matter to me.
Should we do 23 in round one, 26 in round two? Okay, I'll put round two by 26. And then 27 and 29. So I'll read through it one more time, and I believe that leaves us with 9 questions so far. So 1, 3, 4, 8, 12 and 14 together, 16, 19, 23, 27, 29. Is that what you got?
Yeah, I think that might be 10, but okay.
That is 10 so far, even combining one.
That's right.
They're in the same category. Thank you. Okay, so that's 10, and now we're going to do the same thing with the stakeholder report, proposed questions. Same thing, choose one I'll hand these out first and then we'll talk. I don't know if this will take as long because there's fewer, but I want you to at least consider each of them. So here as well, based on the stakeholder report, we have some other categories, and I'll name what they are because I don't think anyone will be surprised. They read the summary report. I'd like you to pick one question at this point about curriculum, one on finance, one on school reform and strategic planning, one on consensus building, although that one is also very similar to the collaborative questions and trust building questions you've already asked, one question for parent engagement, and one on student safety.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. It's one per category, correct? Including the ones that do not have a number?
Thanks for asking. The ones that do not have a number, when we did the Q&A and asked for questions about the process in advance, we got some, such as will stakeholders be involved in interviews and so on and so forth. We got some that are candidate questions, and I promised folks during the Q&A I'd pass those on to the board. I don't suggest we use those, but I think the other questions get to the gist of that. I wanted to make sure you knew what people had suggested before the Q&A to make sure that that content is addressed somewhere in these other questions.
Thank you.
I have the sense that most people are reading back through their previous selections, so let's run through the list and make a tally on where we're at. Our first proposed question based on our stakeholder feedback is in the category of curriculum. Who identified question number 1? Question number 4. Thank you. Question number 2. Question number 3. Okay. Under finance, question number 4. Question number 5. Question number 6. Under the category of school reform / strategic planning, question number 7. Question number 8. Question number 9. 0. Under consensus building, question number 10. Question number 11. Question number 12. Question number 13. Okay. Under the category of parent engagement, question number 14. Question number 15. I will note that I made significant editorial changes to question number 14, but I still, Director Davis noticed that I crossed out most of the question, but, so whatever. I still had to vote for something, so I voted for 14. Category of student safety, question number 16. Question number 17. Okay. All right, so we have tallies in every category. Ms. Dorn?
So in this case, we could do the same thing. Some could go to round 2, or we could combine them. In curriculum, it sounds like question 1 was preferred. Question 3 is also preferred by 3 of you. I don't know if that's possible to combine those. They're different. Should we go with question 1 and possibly question 3 in the round 2? Okay. Finance, 4 and 6. Combine them, or in Round 2 question, we do have some scenario questions that we're going to propose you ask, and we do have one in the area of finance that's very specific about the situation and how would you handle that situation, and it's about finance. And I think that is more similar perhaps to question 6. So if we ask question 4 in this round, because it is a bit more specific, it's a good entry-level question about it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll put a question mark by 3 and put the scenario to see if we can blend those. Looks like question 7. The next one, 10 and 11 might be combinable. They're in a similar vein, I think. Maybe? It's a lot of questions, though.
We have reached the point where people are cracking. We're conceding upon.
We're conceding to 10.
To 10.
I'm hearing 10. Okay, we'll go with 10.
And that's fair because I see where Director Dressley's going. They've got similar components. Just how do you want to get to the answer?
Right, right. And when we ask these, by the way, we won't put back questions back to back that are similar. We sort of do a popcorn style where we mix them up. And so if they're remotely similar, we'll make sure they're not asked near each other. We also open with this quote easier questions to warm people up, and then the real tough ones are more in the middle and toward the end. So, okay, question 10, question 14, and question 16. So that brings us 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That brings you to 16 questions, which is enough for round 1, unless there are other questions you feel we absolutely must ask.
I don't know how to share this, but in the sample interview questions that you sent us, there's one question on here that I ask every single candidate I interview, and it's number 6. I don't know if people have.
There's a way.
Director Tate, you said question 6, right?
Correct.
On page 30? Okay.
Yes.
Adding question 6 from the list in the training packet. Are there any others from that training packet that you really want us to add to this list? You're at 17 right now. We usually say 12 to 18 totals. It can be a lot. We've had a couple of districts ask more than 18, and they've gotten through them. There are some candidates, though, that felt rushed to get through them because they wanted to leave 10 minutes or so for questions, and so they didn't address them as deeply as they'd wanted to. So,
I believe last time, I'm looking at the process we went through, and granted it was on Zoom, and that can change things too. But correct me if I'm wrong, anybody else was there, I feel like we had around 14. And I felt like it was very this. So now I'm starting to think that 17 we probably can pull off, but we might want to be careful about 18. Because didn't we have like 14 last time?
My concern is if we're combining these ones and there's a lot of questions to the one, are we going to get through all 17? Are they going to feel rushed? Are they going to have the time to ask the questions? So are there ones that maybe, do you eliminate or you take the second round, or the multi-step, especially the multi-question ones?
and they'll have a copy of these questions in front of them. And one of the things that we tell them before we bring them in the room is make sure you read the question, because some people aren't auditory learners. They'll read it. And then we always repeat, read the question, make sure you've answered it. And so sometimes they will read it and go, I want to add this, and then they'll keep adding, because we want them to be thorough in their response and not just skate above and give you a short answer. So we will tell them to be very careful and do what you just said, answer everything that's asked. So you could go through here and maybe cut a couple if you'd like to. It's your interviews.
I'm going to retract what I said. I just did the math, and while it doesn't seem like much, from my experience in interviewing people, you're talking over 3 minutes. You're talking 3 minutes and 20 seconds per question. That's a long time to answer a question. So I take back what I said. I think it can be pulled off, and I divided it by 18, so the 60 minutes by 18, so that's a lot of time, I think.
So what I hear is that we're at the upper end of what's commonly asked, but if candidates are provided that to read ahead of time, we're not going to sneak another one in. But I would ask MSBA, when you look at the combining questions, let's not just do a flat out, this turned into 4 questions and 1 question, but really apply your professional expertise and see if there's a way to kind of, again, speak to Director Tate's point, ask about a topic with a specific example and then maybe a future forward piece. But let's not try and get really dense multiple questions. Thank you.
So we're on 17. Is everyone good with that? All right, great. I'm going to come around and collect these. Thank you very much for your understanding. I do appreciate it. And then I'm going to hand out one more thing as we're wrapping up. At the last meeting, when we had the planning meeting packet, and you were discussing salary language for the brochure, we had 22, 23 information for all other districts, and Hastings happened to have 23, 24. So Kathy sent us a copy of the contract. Thank you very much. And we then updated this to reflect Hastings 22, 23. So this is information as you start to think about contract negotiations. I wanted to make sure you had the current information.
Yeah, I know. The HVAC just turned off. It's very quiet in here. But that does lead me to the last point, and this is more on what's represented on our board calendar and less than what's represented in board book right now, although it's under decide, discuss, and schedule necessary steps. We need to make a decision as a board how we're going to approach the negotiations piece, right? And my understanding and my recollection from the planning meeting is that, however we want to do it is how we want to do it. If we use an ad hoc committee or a committee, we need to be cognizant of scheduling with regard to open meeting law and providing sufficient time, and we may identify a candidate on the evening of the second interviews, thinking they'll be available in 3 days. We'll have a meeting scheduled. They're not really available. It's coming into kind of a busy time of year. Or are we in a position where we can, and I was thinking we'd get to a place where we could have some conversation about this tonight. I acknowledge that we have been together for 3 hours. So I'm just putting this out there right now as a decision we have to make. Or can we give parameters to a person? And that person could be chair, they could be vice chair, they could be treasurer. I'd say vice chair and treasurer because on the past go around for negotiations, the roles that those board members sat in were responsible to bring back that first round of negotiations. So we've all had the experience of doing that. But we need to identify the parameters. So we have to decide the process and then the parameters. I think we're not going to be in a place to do that tonight. I feel like we haven't had snacks. It's been 3 hours.
Can I make a couple of quick notes?
yeah.
And then is it okay if I hit the road?
Yes, please do.
If you're going to continue on this, 'cause normally we aren't involved in contract negotiations at all. We simply give you that model contract and we do the competitive scan, and that's it. So a couple of thoughts. You're on a short runway for negotiations because your interviews are taking place at the end of May. And I would not dawdle and delay the process, or you may lose a candidate. They may be in another pool. We won't know that unless they're a finalist. If they haven't been named a finalist, we wouldn't know that. But if they're in a pool, we will usually. So in that case, sometimes in the interest of time, having a subgroup or a person identified and give them parameters as a board to negotiate within. Sometimes it's the overall compensation package we set a limit of this and work out what you need to within that total compensation package. It might be retirement or healthcare or salary, but you give them sort of a big picture bubble to work within. And then they obviously need to bring that back to the board, and the board can continue to edit or approve or not approve what you've given them leeway to do. That will speed things up, and it is a concern this late in season that if you take too long, you may lose somebody. And then the only other thing I want to point out is now that we've got everyone having the 22-23 data in there, Hastings is really low. And so my only concern would be you find a great candidate, and if it's too low, they're going to walk away. You're not in the range where you maybe should be to keep someone or get someone of the caliber you're looking for. But that's for you to decide. This is your hire, so food for thought. And if someone does walk away from a contract because it doesn't work or you're not willing to meet them where they need to be, we'll help you find an interim and we'll do the search again next year.
So from the perspective of just the transparency, obviously you want it laid out this way. But if certain parameters are given that say, look, we know this says this, but we also know where that falls out. So the parameters that we're putting forward as a board can be more than this, correct? And I know I'm saying that. And most people, like when they're looking at positions, they say, here's the salary range or here's what the last person was. I think that most people don't say, oh, that's definitely the ceiling. Most people know better than to know that's the ceiling, and this is what this individual is paid. Doesn't mean what you're going to get paid. Things have changed. We see it. We know how it ranks. That kind of thing. So I'm not overly concerned about what's here. I just think the board needs to make sure, however we determine to do this, that the parameters are laid out appropriately.
I guess my concern with just looking at these numbers is we have no idea how long this superintendent has been there or how many years they've been a superintendent. Because obviously, if you're moving somebody into a superintendency for the very first time, it's going to be a different number than if somebody's coming from somewhere where they've been 15 years, as a superintendent. So I guess I don't know if there's any way we could get that for context in these numbers to have an idea really how that compares with experience.
Pardon me. We can get it. We can get the ones that we don't know.
That's the point.
Yeah, and to that point, thank you, Mark, or Director Zuzik, for providing that insight, and we can get that. To that point, the answer is that we don't know, and we don't know how our pay scale compares. Even if somebody's coming from an assistant or an associate superintendent, they may still be paying above our scale. We are that low right now. So when we set the parameters, and I think realistically, now this was a task identified for tonight. If you look on the district website, this is a thing we're going to do, is set superintendent contract parameters. I am, again, acknowledging the length of time that we've been here and thinking this has the potential to be an item that we take up on the 10th. I don't want to go a lot longer than that because, we're going to hit mid-May, we're going to have a lot of school activities, we're going to have a lot of board action, just regular board work that we're doing. So the parameter could be things to consider. It could be the amount agreed to in what would have been our current superintendent's next contract. Again, you're not offering that upper limit. You're saying that's the upper limit that's available to negotiate within. It could be that we're going to get in mid-range of our competitive districts, and then we negotiate within that. These are the kind of things that we have to think about. It's not that the parameter is going to be the number we offer. It's going to be the parameter and take into consideration the experience and the current pay grade of whomever we might be making an offer to.
Might it be appropriate to use Director Subert and Director Mohn to look over our shoulders while we're doing this as well? I think it would be appropriate.
Chair Hidding?
Yeah.
May I be excused?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, yes,
No.
absolutely.
Love y'all, but I
Thank
want to
you
hit the
so
road,
much.
so I'm going to go. So
Thanks for coming.
thank you. It's great to see you. Really appreciate all the work you did tonight. It was a lot to get through. I know interview training and questions is a lot. So I'll see you again on the 10th. I do have a link to join virtually, courtesy of Becky, at 7 o'clock. I know you have something else going on earlier that night. If for some reason I've got another meeting in cities, I'll swing through here. Otherwise, I'll be here virtually, and we'll get everything ready to go for the 16th. I'm excited for you. In 2 days, look for the link to access the applications. Please keep them private. Be careful where you're reviewing the information, okay? Take care, everybody, and thanks so much. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Yes, and we certainly would use, we can use some resources within the district. And at the end of the day, it's our decision. Right? And we've got to recognize, I think we have to recognize the link between what we put in the financial package and the quality of the candidate that we might get. Director Mo.
If we're gonna, I would just ask that if we do ask individuals within the district office, that it is strictly, I don't want to put them in a position where it's going to be weird. So for example, hey, we're taking a look at these numbers. Could you crunch this? What does this look over the span of the contract? That's what I would want to strictly keep it at.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to look up a previous link and I'm not having any luck.
So I just had a comment. I would not feel comfortable agreeing to like giving the parameters of what the current contract to be started in July 1st if that had gone through. I would be comfortable agreeing to the mid-range and then letting somebody work within those parameters. Totally comfortable with that.
Yeah, I will say that my recollection, and this is what I'm was trying to look up, because we did receive a comparative chart. Maybe you printed it out. I'm just looking for my link, and even in that, it was lower than mid-range. Right. So I'm just pointing out a little bit of an inconsistency, and we have to get some clarity, because I believe mid-range of competitive districts is higher than what
Is here.
No, not what is here, than what was offered. And what would have been the 23 to 26 contract. Yeah. Okay, that offer was below mid-range. Yes.
Use my words. If superintendent would have stayed, the 23 to 26 contract, that package was below average than all these.
It was below mid-range, yes.
Than all these other schools.
Just to clear, so are you talking strictly salary, or are you talking the entire package?
The whole package.
I agree with Director Dressley that maybe we can't take a look at that 23 to 26 contract because it's a different superintendent. It was for a continued, but it's a second contract, right? So this is a new contract that we'd be looking at. So the parameters are likely going to look different. We could use it as a touch point, maybe, looking at left and right parameters. But I wouldn't want to just say, okay, yeah, we're going to adopt this 23 to 26 contract.
Absolutely correctly. Yes, I think that makes sense. Director Davis.
There are other components I would consider, but just, I guess it's kind of Director Dressley's point. The mean is about 197.3. If you look at these and then just do the simple math, that's the mean. So clearly, even at the mean, you see where we fall relative to 197.3. So we have to do something about it. But to Director Dressley's point, it's somewhere in there, depending on how the rest of the package falls out. And it is the first contract, not the second.
I think an area, and I'll get you next, Director Dressley. I think an area where we could gain some support from our district office is to ask for an assessment of our competitive districts, much like they've provided evaluation, and then identify what a mean or mid-range total package would be. And then we could consider that. Could decide if that was a parameter that we would be comfortable with or accept that that's a reality. And then obviously the negotiations are within what the range of experience is of that person.
Oh, sure.
Because I think, again, this is a 2023. I appreciate that this is now all the same year comparison, but maybe we could get that type of evaluation, not asking for input, but asking for a data evaluation.
Yeah.
Director Dressley.
I agree with that. And I also just have a question. So for the parameters of the contract, we're in a situation to where we could make some changes to things we had done previously. And I know that we've talked about the 300 series numerous times at previous meetings, but I think that would be, because of what we're doing, it's an important thing to take a look at again, possibly.
So a point is noted, but I want to make sure that this special meeting is around superintendent search. It's not around policy. So I want to be careful about what we do and don't discuss tonight. Director Beisel.
So are we going to develop like 3 people to sit on this and do it, or are we doing it all 7 of us?
So if we do it with 3 people, or if we do it with all 7, and this is to the point that Ms. Dorn made, then we need to do it as an open meeting, and we need to post it, and we probably can't post it until after the person's been contacted and identified a time that we can do it. So I think the alternative, and this is where we have to decide, is could we establish parameters and say, all right, we're good with this packet, with a package of this much dollar value, and then the chair, not that I want to do this, but the chair would negotiate the contract. The entire board votes on the contract, and that we're currently slated to do that on the 31st. And the question would be is if within the parameters identified, could we get to a place where building from the model contract, because we've got a lot of historical stuff in our contract, building from the model contract, could we come to an agreement? So the question is, if we want to be timely, it would be one person. We would give one person that authority to go negotiate the contract. The whole board votes on it. If we want to be less timely, then we could consider a committee or the board as a whole sitting down in negotiations.
So if we come up with parameters on May 10th, let's just say we've gotten this data, we say, 175 to 210, whatever. We give that to you. You work on it. May 30, we get it, we vote on it. We find the person, yeah. So we don't have to continue to meet about it. If we get all the data, May 10th, we agree on the parameters. The quickest, easiest way.
That's my understanding.
That's what I wanted to make sure I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah. Director Dressley.
Would the model policy that we'd be working off of be the MSBA MASA model policy, or would it be our previous? Can we even answer that out loud?
Well, I think we can talk. I mean, that can be a parameter. I would suggest, because I imagine I didn't participate in the negotiation on the last selection, but I think contracts get these tails, and they get these like things that, especially when they're just serving one employee, things that become valuable to one person are less valuable to another, and they get a little bit weird. I would strongly anticipate that the beginning point would be the parameter and the model policy. I also suspect, we don't know if we're going to get somebody that's had a superintendent experience in the past, so they might be ready to start with a clean contract, as opposed maybe somebody walks in with some unique characteristics of a contract that are very valuable to them, that have not substantive financial impact, and we would work from that.
I would just like to state that it might be good to check with Director Moen as the Director of Human Resources, as she potentially may have insights on that and feelings about it, because I do know that, you know, like legal has weighed in on parts of our current contracts and things like that. So I would strongly recommend that you talk with her before deciding if you're going to use the MSBA model policy versus changing things in the current policy.
That's a really good point. And I think, and thank you, Ms. Garcia, I think, again, the question is if the board's going to give guidance and it's going to give guidance around a financial piece, or I suppose the board could choose to give guidance on the exact characteristics of the policy or the model that's built on. But I think recognizing that we've had a recent review of our existing contract is probably valuable. Again, I feel like we're not gonna, I don't want to drive us to a decision tonight, but I think from this point, what I hear going forward is that I will coordinate with our Director of Finance and the Director of HR and ask for an evaluation of our comparative districts with regard to the superintendent's contract. And then within that, ask for an identification of an average. I'm shying away from the use of median or mean. I would ask for an evaluation or calculation of the average contract package. And then that would bring that back for a discussion point to the meeting on the 10th. Okay, I generally see head nodding. All right, so that'll be the direction going forward on that, and I will get that information. Thank you. That was the last item that I was aware of. Did anybody else have something that they anticipated we were going to address tonight within the context of superintendent selection? Director Tate.
Just one other piece. Could we definitely get the fill in the blanks on the years of service on the comparable districts on those contracts?
Okay, so as
reference
when a comparative.
So how many years?
So when a comparative table, I'm sorry, I was stuck on the word table, is developed, ask that years of service be one of the columns. Okay. All right. I can do that. Anything else? All right, hearing nothing, I would entertain a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's a battle. I'm going to go with Director Davis, I think, because the sound waves got to me first from him. I have no idea who seconded.
Director Dressley.
Director Dressley. All those in discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Post same sign. Silence. All right, motion carries unanimously. We're adjourned at 9:21. Thanks, everybody. No moaning and groaning. We got to build up our butts and seats muscles. Get ready for interview day. No.